Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions. The first portfolio is Constitution, External Affairs and Culture and Parliamentary Business. Members wishing to ask a supplementary question should press the request to speak buttons during the relevant question. There's quite a bit of demand, so brevity in questions and responses would be appreciated. And I call first question number one, Carol Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to protect the ongoing viability of local and regional museums and galleries.
Cabinet Secretary Angus Roberts.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks to Carol Mochan for her question. While it is for locally elected council representatives to make decisions on how best to deliver services in their local communities, the Scottish Government recognises the significant challenges the museums and galleries sector is facing. The Scottish Government is developing a museums capacity and support programme in partnership with Museums Galleries Scotland and the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and that will invest £4 million in 2025-26, taking a collaborative and strategic approach to enable positive change across the sector, ensuring that these vital organisations have the resilience to continue to deliver for Scotland's communities and for the nation as a whole.
Carol Mochan.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Across South Scotland, there are a number of important cultural artefacts that museums do not have the funding to maintain. If this relatively small amount of funding is not found, these pieces will have to go into storage away from the public in order to protect it. This will further decrease visitor numbers. Is this government sleepwalking into the terminal decline of Scottish culture anywhere other than in our major cities? Or does the plan the Cabinet Secretary mentioned support culture within our towns and villages?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm happy to confirm that this is a Scotland-wide programme. Carol Mochan has raised concerns about some specific artefacts. I'm not aware of those, but I'd be very grateful if she could let me know. I would want to look very closely about those and understand if there's anything additionally that I can do to support their retention and their display in the region that she represents.
And supplementary, Evelyn Tweed.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Thanks to record investment from the Scottish Government, I note that earlier this month, Museums Galleries Scotland announced new grants funding of £2.4 million for 2025. Can the Cabinet Secretary speak to how this funding will help maintain and revive museums and galleries for communities across Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
We value the support that Museums Galleries Scotland offer the sector, and due to the increased investment from the Scottish Government in the 25-26 budget this year, Museums Galleries Scotland have opened the Small Grants Fund to non-accredited museums, increasing support opportunities to more organisations across Scotland. And Museums Galleries Scotland have also bolstered their Repair and Adaptation Fund, which will support capital costs that directly increase the the resilience of museums or improve accessibility through projects that address capital repair issues and adaptations. Further details on the full range of support available through Museums Galleries Scotland is available on their website.
Question 2, Fulton MacGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on plans to increase funding for local museums and heritage centres, including the Summerlee Museum of Scottish Industrial Life in Coatbridge.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government values our local museums and heritage centres, which is why we have increased Museums Galleries Scotland's funding from £2.7 million in 2024-25 to £4.27 million in 25-26, as well as continuing to support Historic Environment Scotland. These organisations deliver direct and indirect support to local museums and heritage centres across Scotland by providing expert advice as well as grant schemes, details of which can be found on their respective websites, and I would encourage Mr MacGregor to share this information with the Summerlee Museum. We're also collaboratively developing a strategically focused brand new £4 million museums capacity and support programme with sector partners.
Fulton MacGregor.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. This week I will be present at 2 culturally significant events being held at Summerlee. On Friday I will attend the annual International Workers' Memorial Day, and on Saturday I will be speaking at the opening of Ships Ahoy Scottish Maritime Heritage Exhibition along with Paul Sweeney, MSP. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that such events highlight the essential role local museums play in preserving Scotland's industrial and maritime heritage, and that increased funding is needed to support and sustain them within our communities?
Cabinet Secretary.
I do agree that such events highlight the essential role that local museums play in preserving Scotland's renowned industrial and maritime heritage, whilst delivering significant benefits to communities across Scotland. As already mentioned, this is why we've increased funding to Museums Galleries Scotland from £2.7 million to £4.27 million this year. In addition to this, the Scottish Government is developing a museums capacity and support programme in partnership with Museums Galleries Scotland and National Lottery Heritage Fund, where we'll be investing £4 million in 25-26, and I'm pleased to say that this increased funding will offer additional support to the sector as a whole.
Question 3, Alec Rowley.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what action it has taken to support young people to access the creative industries.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government has a long-standing history of supporting youth arts programmes. This includes the Youth Music Initiative and Sistema Scotland. Both will receive a 3% uplift in 2025-26, taking annual investment to £9.79 million and £2.68 million respectively. We're also providing £12 million to local authorities to support free instrumental music tuition, and Screen Scotland's groundbreaking film and screen education programme is supporting Scotland's next generation of filmmakers. We're also calling on the UK Government to negotiate a youth mobility agreement with the European Union to ensure that young people can access the international opportunities of the creative industries.
Alec Rowley.
My question is really to ask the Cabinet Secretary what discussions does he and his department have with education, training and skills and the Education Department. Fife College, for example, has about a third of its provision in the creative industries sector. The Scottish Funding Council has announced a rise for colleges of 2.6%. However, on further looking into this, it does look like it's broken down across the country, and that Fife College would only be in receipt of an increase that looks like a teaching grant of 1.6%. Therefore, my understanding is that the college grant that is being offered to Fife is in fact a real terms cut, despite the fact a third of their provision is in the creative industries. Do you have discussions with colleagues in other parts of government to ensure that these colleges, which are crucial for the advancement of creative industries and supporting people into them?
Cabinet Secretary.
The first part of Mr Rowley's question was about, are there discussions that take place with education colleagues about the provision of support and education and training in relation to the creative industries? And as I mentioned, they're specifically about the rollout of the screen sector element of the curriculum right across Scotland, which have a positive benefit, and Fife too is an example of just that. Mr Rowley has drawn my attention to a specific issue in the region that he represents. I'd be grateful if he can forward the details of that to me so that I might be able to reply to him in a more considered and broader way to the specific part, second part of the question that he asked me.
A couple of brief supplementaries. First, Willie Coffey.
Thank you. Could the Cabinet Secretary advise how the Access All Art Fund will continue to support the creative ambitions of children and young people across Scotland? And could you provide an update on some of the projects underway as a result of the 2025 allocations?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Access All Arts Fund is supported by Creative Scotland and the National Lottery, and I'd be happy to put Mr Coffey in contact with the Youth Arts team at Creative Scotland to learn more about it. Scottish Government funding directly supports the Youth Music Initiative, which includes multi-art form strands, and will receive a budget uplift this year, taking our annual investment to £9.78 million. And within this, we will be work with YouthLink, amongst other partners, to ensure young people from all backgrounds have access to inspirational, creative opportunities.
Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. A recent survey of participants for the Access All Arts Fund, which benefits children and young people, found that 92% of recipients experienced a positive impact on their mental health and well-being, while 82% had receiving funding helped them overcome barriers to the arts. Given the importance of this funding and enable children and young people to flourish within the arts and creative sector, what action is put in place to ensure that that funding continues into coming years?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm delighted to see Mr Stewart's welcome for the positive impact that arts learning, arts teaching and the participation in cultural life has for young people. We have raised the culture budget in Scotland by the biggest single increment ever, and the intention is to continue the growth of that budgetary support for the culture sector. I would welcome his support in that. I note, of course, he voted against the budget, so I will work very hard to persuade him next year that he should vote for the continuing increases in culture funding that the Scottish National Party is delivering in government.
Question 4, Maggie Chapman.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on how its international development work is supporting the humanitarian response in Palestine.
Cabinet Secretary.
The First Minister yesterday announced an additional £300,000 to support humanitarian aid efforts in the Middle East through the Disasters Emergency Committee Appeal and Scottish charities SCIAF and Mercy Corps. This is in addition to our previous contribution of £250,000 to the DEC Appeal, SCIAF and Mercy Corps, as well as £750,000 for the UNRWA Appeal in November 2023. This funding has helped to deliver life-saving food, shelter and medical assistance for people across Gaza and the wider region. Humanitarian needs continue to escalate, and the DEC Appeal has so far raised £3.8 million in Scotland, and the Scottish public can continue to make a donation to the DEC Appeal.
Maggie Chapman.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response. He will be aware that, in addition to the important support he outlines, there are many other organisations that have made contributions, sometimes in kind, to support those trying to cope with occupation and genocide. One example is the International Fire and Rescue Association, a Scottish-based charity who has donated a fire appliance to Dundee's twin city, Nablus. But it's been impounded by Israeli military customs since last July. Is there anything the Cabinet Secretary can do to press for the release of this appliance so that it can be used as intended to aid communities in Nablus?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think Maggie Chapman is right to raise the fact that there is a very broad range of Scottish charitable and third sector organisations that want to assist Palestinian people in their time of great need and distress at the present time. It's not just the fire engine that she's talked about that is being stopped from entering Gaza. Much of the aid effort that the international community would wish to provide to people in Gaza is not getting through either. So I will use every and any opportunity that I can to add my voice and the Scottish Government's voice to appeal to authorities everywhere that have a locus in this to allow aid to get through to help the people of Gaza.
Supplementary, Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Following the previous portfolio questions and in terms of the Scottish Government's international development work, the Cabinet Secretary stated in a letter to me that none of the grants awarded under the Climate Justice Fund have gone to non-profit entity or gone to for-profit entities. However, the 2024 annual report for one of the three organisations who received money from the Climate Justice Fund appears to show net profits and proposed dividends. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to look into this again, and in the meantime can he tell the Chamber what his definition of non-profit is?
The supplementary question doesn't relate directly to the initial question, but is anything the Cabinet Secretary...
I will try my best, Presiding Officer. We are very careful to make appropriate decisions in relation to the humanitarian response in Palestine. But as Mr Bibby has drawn my attention to, there is wider funding that is provided beyond disasters and emergency relief. I will look closely at the point that he makes. I will write back to him. I will look at this. But I'm sure, Presiding Officer, you would wish me to focus my remarks on the humanitarian response in Palestine, which I have done already.
Thank you. Question 5, Emma Roddick.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government how it is ensuring that its work to support and promote Scotland's art and culture is geographically spread and representative.
Cabinet Secretary.
We are very proud that our record funding to Creative Scotland this year supports a wide range of exciting new entrants to the multi-year funding programme, serving smaller, often rural communities. This includes Glen Ken's Community and Arts Trust in Dumfries and Galloway, the Lith in the Highlands, who join existing members of the geographically diverse cohort such as the Devon projects in Aberdeenshire and Dance North in Murray. This demonstrates that we are committed to ensuring our support for the sector is distributed across Scotland, reaching the communities who need it most.
Roddick.
Thank you. The Highlands and Islands has a lot to be proud of in the realm of arts and culture, but I am aware that many organisations often feel they're at a disadvantage because it's not as easy for them to mix with officials or funders when informal conversations about what people are doing well often happen in the Central Belt. Could you go into more detail on how the Scottish Government ensures opportunities are available across the country? And can I reiterate my very warm invitation for him to come to Eden Court and hear for himself about the role that theatre plays, not only in fostering local talent and promoting arts and culture in Inverness and the Highlands, but ensuring that it is firmly embedded in the wider community?
Secretary.
Can I give Emma Roddick the assurance that the voices, the views, the needs, interests, concerns and expectations of arts organisations throughout Scotland, regardless of where they are important to the Scottish Government and are important to Creative Scotland, where we have strategic partnerships, where we have roundtables, where we have ongoing dialogue. I am very keen to make sure that everybody that can take part, wants to take part, is able to do just that. As a parliamentarian who represented a North of Scotland constituency for a long time, I know how important the Eden Court Theatre is, and I would wish to put on the record that all organisations that meet established criteria are considered equally for funding, irrespective of interactions that they may have in person with Creative Scotland. Meeting the criteria will be the sole factor that determines a funding decision, and I would urge the Eden Court Theatre to get in touch with Creative Scotland directly if they have any concerns.
Brief supplementary, Pam Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Tower Digital Arts Cinema in my region of Helensburgh was saved from closure last month due to the hard work and determination of campaigners. The facility has provided regular cinema screenings and has served as a venue for concerts, election, hustings and other community events since 2014. The potential closure of the venue would be devastating for the local community, who are limited in terms of cultural venues. Will the Cabinet Secretary congratulate the Save the Tower campaign group for its hard work, and can he outline what more the Scottish Government is doing to support cultural facilities in the West Scotland region?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm absolutely delighted to join the member in commending the campaigners. I think one of the underreported developments in recent years were the degree of financial distress that has been felt in the cultural sector here and elsewhere in the United Kingdom has been existential for many, is that a great number of these important cultural venues have been saved from closure, and we should all be very grateful to those who have been involved in the campaigns to retain them. I can give Pam Gossel the assurance that both I and colleagues in Creative Scotland are absolutely seized of making sure that the funding streams that are available can go to venues and organisations around the country. That has already been rolled out in part through the multi-annual year programme of Creative Scotland, and other funding streams are also available.
And even more briefly, Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Visit Scotland National Events Funding Programme aims to support events out with the Central Belt. However, one of the eligibility criteria requires more than 1,000 in-person attendees. This is an unreasonable ask for many smaller rural and island communities. So what can the Scottish Government do to enable a review of this requirement to ensure that smaller island and rural communities can access the fund?
Cabinet Secretary.
In replying briefly, Presiding Officer, Visit Scotland and the National Events Strategy falls in the orbit of another ministerial colleague, but I will make sure that the point that she has raised is passed on to my departmental colleagues, because the point that she makes, of course, is entirely relevant for smaller or parts of the country that are further away from the major centres of population.
Okay, question 6, Willie Rennie.
To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with EU member states regarding Scotland's alignment with EU policies in light of the election of President Trump.
Cabinet Secretary.
Regardless of the outcome of any US presidential election and following the strong deregulatory impact of Brexit, the Scottish Government has always had a policy of aligning with the European Union where it is possible and meaningful to do so. In Scotland, we will continue to pursue this alignment across a full range of devolved policy areas. This will allow us to protect and advance the high standards that our fellow Europeans benefit from, thanks to effective EU regulation, and will also keep up close to legislation in place across the member states of the European Union.
Willie Rennie.
I would agree with him, but I think it's even more important following the election of President Trump, considering the volatile effects that his leadership has had. Now, it's reported that President Trump will be visiting Scotland in September. So what plans has the Cabinet Secretary got for that visit, engagement with President Trump, and what is he going to say to President Trump?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I can confirm to Mr Rennie that I don't have any scheduled meetings with President Trump, that I may raise the issues that he's outlining, and there are also no plans in place and a time agreed for any potential state visit, which is a matter for the United Kingdom government. The points that he raises, though, about the challenges that have been thrown up in recent weeks and months do make it much more challenging for all of us to make sure that we can protect our economic interests and free trade. And that is something, going back to the question, Presiding Officer, that we will remain in dialogue with our European Union friends, neighbours and allies. And it's one of the jobs that Scotland House in Brussels does an excellent amount of work on.
Question 7, Karen Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its strategy to further the case for Scottish independence in light of the reported polling indicating a majority in support.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government believes the best outcomes for Scotland will come if we ensure that more of the decisions about Scotland are taken by and for the people of Scotland. The First Minister is setting out a vision of a country free from child poverty, with higher living standards and with the powers of independence to create the kind of Scotland that we know is possible. We remain committed to publishing a final overview independence paper to give people in Scotland the information that they need to make an informed choice about their constitutional future.
Adam.
I thank him for that answer. People in Scotland are recognising the democratic deficit that we face. Given this growing public awareness, can the Scottish Government provide an update on how it intends to build on that momentum and continue informing the public through its civic engagement and public education about the opportunities of Scotland becoming an independent country?
Well, I agree with the member, and I think that it's important to say that the Scottish Government has set out and will continue to set out the opportunities that will come from being an independent country. We've set out our plans for the economy of an independent Scotland, for rejoining the European Union, for a new constitution with democracy, rights and equality at its heart, and for an inclusive, welcoming approach to citizenship, as well as a migration system that meets Scotland's needs. The First Minister is also setting out our 4 priorities for government through a series of speeches, and will continue to speak to the issues that matter to the public so that people can have an informed choice about the future options that are available to them all.
Question 8, Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will change its policy position in relation to an independent Scotland seeking to rejoin the EU in light of the potential impact of US tariffs on the UK and the EU.
Cabinet Secretary.
Global economic volatility following President Trump's announcements on tariffs reinforces more than ever the importance of Scotland having the security, the stability and the opportunity that comes with EU membership. The EU is a rules and values-based organisation with a single market of around 450 million citizens. So amongst present global uncertainties, the importance of sustaining a Europe of countries working together for peace, prosperity and progress has never been greater, and for these reasons we are profoundly committed to Scotland achieving membership of the European Union as an independent nation.
Christine Graham.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary very much for his answer, with which I agree, because given the recent analysis by the Office of the Chief Economic Advisor, it is estimated that Brexit trade barriers could impact Scotland's economy by £4 billion. And with the unreliability almost day to day of the Trump pronouncements and tariffs, does the Cabinet Secretary agree we were better in the EU than out?
Secretary.
Indeed, I agree. Brexit has been a huge backwards step, which has sharply reduced access to our greatest international trading market, while bureaucracy, costs, delays and complexity have been imposed on Scottish businesses. Recent Scottish Government modelling shows that leaving the European Union is estimated to reduce Scottish GDP by at least £4 billion in the long run, measured in today's GDP compared to continued EU membership. The Scottish Government is doing what it can to mitigate the damage of a Brexit that Scotland didn't vote for, to minimise divergence with the European Union and to ease Scotland's return to the EU as an independent country at the earliest opportunity.
Briefly, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was hoping we were going to get some Brexit realism there from Christine Graham, but sadly we're disappointed on this occasion. But I wonder if I can ask the Cabinet Secretary if he would agree with me that with the impact we are already seeing of US tariffs on Scottish exports, good relations with the US have never been more important. And I wonder if he shares my concern at the potential closure of the US consulate in Edinburgh as being mooted by the State Department. Would the Cabinet Secretary acknowledge the excellent work that the consulate has done over many years, and would he join with me in calling on the US State Department to reconsider any plans to close that very vital resource?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I join Murdo Fraser in paying tribute to the work of the Consulate of the United States of America in Edinburgh? They have done a tremendous job over the more than 200 years that there has been a consulate in Scotland. Since 1798 there has been diplomatic relations between US diplomats and Scotland, and we very much value all of that. Indeed, I met with the Consul General, Catherine Porter, this morning. Of course, these are decisions for the State Department and the United States administration, but I would just observe that in recent years we have seen a significant increase in consular representation in Scotland, and I think many people would be extremely disappointed if the United States were not part of that wider consular family of the international community based in Scotland.
Thank you. That concludes portfolio questions on Constitution, External Affairs and Culture. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next portfolio to allow front benches to change. Okay, the next item of business is portfolio questions on justice and home affairs. A reminder to members that questions 4 and 8 have been grouped together, so I'll take the supplementaries on those questions after the substantive questions have been asked. Members looking to ask a supplementary should press the request to speak buttons during the relevant questions. Again, there's quite a bit of demand for supplementary questions, so the usual appeal for brevity in both the questions and the answers. I call question number 1, Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government regarding any implications for its work on tackling rural crime and preventing the theft and resale of machinery in Scotland, when it first made aware of the proposals of the Equipment Theft Prevention Act 2023, which applies to England and Wales.
Minister Siobhan Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I thank the member for the question. And I know this is an issue that the member has raised before with her interest in rural crime. It was previously thought that the Scottish Government officials became aware of this MP's private members' bill in May 2023. Ministers have now been made aware that there was some limited contact from the UK Government at official level back in November 2022, which was not highlighted again until May 2023.
Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I thank the Minister for her answer, because previously she had told me that the Government were only informed of its existence in May 2023 and giving insufficient time to fully consider the implications for the bill in Scotland. However, she has just confirmed, and I'm pleased to say, that the Home Office contacted the Scottish Government several months before, in February of that year, to discuss the Act and the policy position in Scotland. So instead of agreeing to discuss the Act, the SNP wrote back to say that they did not have any comments to offer, which I find extraordinary. So given the threats of cross-border criminal movement and farm machinery, which impacts many farmers in the Scottish borders, will the Minister engage urgently with the UK Government to ensure we can replicate that Act as soon as possible?
Minister.
Thank you. This legislation has not been implemented down south in England and Wales yet, and my officials have been told that the Home Office are drafting the regulation, but they cannot, at this stage, the Labour Government cannot indicate a time frame for this. I do know that my officials have requested updates from the Home Office as to its progress, and once it's implemented, its effectiveness in mitigating equipment theft before considering potential implications for Scotland and what options might be available for Scottish ministers in terms of replicating the measures here.
And briefly, Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Many of us across the Chamber recognise the serious threats with which rural crime poses on the communities which we represent. Can the Minister please outline how the Scottish Government is delivering on its commitment to continue to work with Police Scotland and other partnership against rural crime partners to develop and implement strategies to combat those perpetrating rural crimes such as equipment theft?
Minister.
Thank you. The Scottish Government recognises the harm caused to individuals, communities and businesses which has been caused by rural crime. We fully support the efforts of the Scottish Partnership Against Rural Crime, known as SPARC, in aiming to tackle rural crime across the country. SPARC is chaired by Police Scotland and draws together key organisations, stakeholders from across the justice and rural sector to provide a robust multi-agency approach to rural crime. The most recent SPARC update from January this year shows that the incidents of rural crime and monetary cost of such incidents are both down on the previous point of last year.
Good question to Tim Eagle.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports that the prisoners released under the Prisoners Early Release Scotland Act 2025 included some who had broken prison rules.
Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance.
Officer, the Prisoners Early Release Scotland Act 2025 now allows most short-term prisoners to be released from prison after serving 40% of their sentence instead of 50%. A breach in prison rules does not form part of the exclusion or eligibility criteria for a person's release from custody, as this process of using the prison rules to amend a person's liberation date ceased in 2001.
Tim Eagle.
Figures uncovered by the Scottish Conservatives revealed that almost a fifth of prisoners released as a result of the SNP's early release scheme broke prison rules while serving time. Our communities are rightly worried about the heightened risks of reoffending that come with that. Does the Minister agree with me that it is important we don't have a perceived soft-touch justice system? And what's the Minister putting in place to make sure that our communities are safe?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, with a prison population in excess of 8,100, I have to advise Mr Eagle with respect that there is nothing soft about our justice system, but the reality is our justice system could certainly be smarter in terms of rehabilitating people and getting that shift where appropriate from the use of custody to the use of custody disposals. As I said in my original answer, that it is many decades now since adding additional days to someone's sentence that ceased more than 20 years ago. We have to remember that our prison rules are subject to legal challenge, but nonetheless they are always kept under review. And it is important to recognise that with the correct planning that took place both with this piece of legislation and with the earlier emergency release provision, that the return to custody rates were certainly lower than reconviction rates.
And briefly, Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on what assessment has been made thus far of the impact of the Prisoners Early Release Scotland Act on relieving some of the acute pressures currently being experienced in our prison estate?
Presiding Officer, the implementation of changes to the short-term release point made by the Prisoners Early Release Scotland Act 2025 resulted in the release of 312 individuals, and the Act will have a sustained impact, with the sentence population expected to be around 5% lower than it would otherwise have been. And taking this action was essential to support the health and well-being of those working and living within the prison estate, and the implementation of the Act has eased some of the immediate pressures in our prison. However, the population remains at a high level, and this is only one of a range of actions to get a more sustainable approach to the use of custody.
Question 3, Claire Baker.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking, including through work involving Police Scotland and local authorities, to address antisocial behaviour in Mid-Scotland and Fife.
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We are committed to support Police Scotland and local authorities who lead local responses to antisocial behaviour involving prevention, intervention and enforcement. This enables a partnership approach focusing on community safety as a whole and taking into account the local need as well. I recognise the impact of antisocial behaviour can have on local communities, which is why we have increased police funding for a record $1.62 billion this year. In addition, through our Cashback for Communities, we have provided £130 million since 2008 to support young people most at risk of being involved in violence, antisocial behaviour and crime. For example, between 2023 and 2024, £354,462 was invested in diversionary work with young people in the Fife Council area.
Claire Baker.
Thank you. The Minister may be aware of a number of recent reports of fire raising in Fife. Over 100 deliberate fires were recorded in March, with more incidents taking place through April. And in the course of one day, 7 deliberate fires were started, despite the extreme risk warning for wildfires that was in place. This fire raising creates huge risk of endangerment and damage to property, and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service have said the increase has put a needless drain on resources. I do know that local work is taking place between the police and fire services in terms of high visibility patrols and engagement with local schools, but can I ask how the Scottish Government is engaging with local services to ensure they are properly resourced and supported in this work, and how is it ensuring its approach to addressing antisocial behaviour is able to respond to these local challenges?
Minister.
Thank you. I very much recognise the impact directed on these communities, especially with antisocial behaviour, but in particular the issue that fire raising that Claire Baker has raised here. I engage very often with Scottish Fire Rescue with that underneath my portfolio remit. It hasn't specifically been raised with me in these meetings yet, although we do, with our at the moment, what's happening is with the Independent Working Group on Antisocial Behaviour report was published back in February this year, and myself, COSLA and Police Scotland are all working together to seeing how we can implement the recommendations from that report to tackle all types of antisocial behaviour.
Question 4, Evelyn Tweed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps are being taken to prevent young people from becoming involved in gang-related activity.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, we have invested more than £6 million over 3 years to support the implementation of the violence prevention framework. This includes supporting medics against violence to engage with young people on the consequences of violence, and Youth Link Scotland to deliver No Knives, Better Lives training to hundreds of practitioners and young people across Scotland. Through Cashback for Communities, we have provided £130 million since 2008 to support young people who are most at risk at being involved in violence, antisocial behaviour or crime. And to date, the programme has reached around 1.3 million young people in Scotland.
Evelyn Tweed.
I thank the Justice Secretary for that answer. Organisations across Scotland are working hard to tackle the root causes of the rise in gang-related activity. What steps are the Government taking to support these organisations working in this area to collaborate, strategise and share learning?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'm very thankful to the multiple organisations working extremely hard at a national and local level to tackle the root causes of gang-related activity. The organisations we are funding through the Violence Prevention Framework are working with local communities and multiple organisations. And this includes place-based work in undertaken by the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit in Edinburgh, Fife, Glasgow. Youth Link Scotland work to coordinate and deliver the No Life's Better Lives training and resources to support, crucially, frontline practitioners, as well as the delivery of the Medics Against Violence Navigator programme, which helps individuals and families access the services they need. And the learning from this work is, of course, shared with others.
Question 8, Ben Macpherson.
Scottish Government how it is working with partners to tackle gang-related violence.
Cabinet Secretary.
Crime, sorry.
Presiding Officer, disrupting organised crime groups, diverting individuals away from organised crime and reducing the harm caused by organised crime to individuals, communities and organisations remains a priority for the Scottish Government and its partners. Partnership working is a crucial part of the approach to organised crime as set out in Scotland's Serious Organised Crime Strategy. The Serious Organised Crime Task Force, which I chair, brings together law enforcement partners and representatives from the public, private and third sectors. And the Scottish Crime Campus at Gartcosh enhances collaboration between key partner organisations in detecting and disrupting serious organised crime and terrorism.
Ben Macpherson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer and all of that ongoing and important and impactful work that is taking place. Parliament will be aware of the reports in recent weeks and months of the very serious situation here in central Scotland, including in my constituency, with targeted instances of organised crime and related to gang violence. Police Scotland and Edinburgh are doing a remarkable job, and I pay tribute to them, and I thank them for their actions and the updates. However, it's all part of a concern that I've had for some months of the number of young people who are getting involved in gang-related crime in my constituency, in this city and across central Scotland. So building on the investment that was stated in a previous answer and cashback, is there any more resource that can be provided for youth work providers in this really difficult time at the moment?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, indeed, Presiding Officer, it's an important point raised by the member, and it is crucial, as he has done, to reinforce the message that has been given by Police Scotland to the people of Edinburgh and elsewhere, that Police Scotland are indeed in pursuit of criminals. They are being tracked down, they are on it, they have made arrests. I can't say anything more about live proceedings, and it's crucial that the police have our full support, because although they will always rise to the challenge, everyone needs to be playing their part to provide information to the police. People can of course do this anonymously via Crime Stoppers, but it's also crucial that other agencies, multi-agencies, are focused on prevention. And I've already mentioned the Cashback for Communities programme. There are many other programmes that are active in the Edinburgh area, and I would be happy to provide information to Mr Macpherson or any other member. But Cashback is currently supporting 16 projects and helping over 3,000 young people in Edinburgh.
Thank you. Brief supplementary, Sharon Dowie.
Thank you. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government treats criminals under the age of 25 with kid gloves, however serious their crimes are. But senior police officers have said that criminal gangs are exploiting this. At the recent summit, young people themselves said actions should have consequences regardless of age. So will the Scottish Government reconsider its attitude to criminals under the age of 25 and scrap their two-tier sentencing guidelines?
And briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I have probably said for the umpteenth time to Ms Dowie, it's imperative, particularly with our young people, that we take approaches, and we see that with the independent Sentencing Council, approaches that are based on evidence and what will actually work to deter our young people. And I would have hoped that Ms Dowie could join this government in condemning the criminal exploitation of our children. These are offences and the exploitation of our children that is somewhat hidden, it is somewhat underreported, and it is very clear to me and others that some of our young people are being exploited by serious organised crime, and they are viewed as disposable resources. And it's imperative that we all stand together to combat the exploitation of our children for criminal purposes.
Question 5, Mark Ruskell.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what the timescale is to adapt the HMP Stirling estate to address the ongoing noise complaints, in light of reports from residents that the noise disturbance is getting worse.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I am aware that the member attended a constructive meeting at HMP and YOI Stirling on the 24th of March to discuss this matter directly with SPS senior officials, during which SPS provided a comprehensive update on solutions. Scottish Prison Service proposals are now in the full and final stage and will change how particular rooms have access to fresh air. A timeline for the project is now being developed and will be shared with the member and other local representatives, including the Local Residents Association, as soon as possible. SPS will then seek final comments prior to submitting formal planning permission with the local council.
Ruskell.
Well, can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response? I absolutely welcome the work that SPS staff do at HMP Stirling. That is not in question at all. But the quality of the building absolutely is. There needs to be an absolute cut in that noise disturbance. I have 3 constituents who've sold houses as a result of this in recent months, others that have declining mental health, others that have simply given up because they don't believe that this change is coming, Cabinet Secretary. So can the Cabinet Secretary ensure that this programme will be accelerated, that the trial noise reduction measures will be put in place immediately, that the planning application to make the measures permanent will be lodged immediately, and that the completion of the project, the clear date for the completion of the project, will be provided as she's already outlined?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, can I just express my ongoing appreciation to the member and also to other MSPs, Mr Stewart, and indeed the constituency MSP, Mr Brown, for pursuing this issue, but doing so constructively and with sensitivity. If I can just reassure him, after portfolio questions, I will indeed be meeting with the Chief Executive of the Scottish Prison Service, and this is a matter that we discuss regularly.
Question 6, Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government regarding its work in antisocial behaviour, what discussions it has had with the UK Government about tackling the misuse of e-bikes?
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I completely understand the concerns over the misuse of e-bikes and other vehicles, and we are committed to collaborating with the UK Government where we can. I have therefore asked for work to be taken forward as a priority to develop a cross-party approach to the UK Government about how we can do more to work together to tackle antisocial behaviour involving vehicles. We are also committed to supporting the police to tackle these issues, including providing record funding of £1.62 billion to Police Scotland for 2025 to 2026 to enhance their response.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is the second time I've raised this issue in the past couple of months, because I'm really concerned about antisocial behaviour in my own city, but also elsewhere. And the UK Government's inactivity in dealing with this increasing problem of antisocial behaviour of e-bike users is galling. And I'm afraid that their intransigists may lead to serious injury or even death. Has the Scottish Government asked the UK Government if they will consider a licensing scheme to control e-bike usage?
Minister.
Thank you. Antisocial behaviour involving vehicles is a shared challenge across the whole of the UK, and with some powers, including vehicle licensing are reserved. We are committed to working with the UK Government to improve community safety and to achieve our shared goal. E-bikes exceeding 250 watts or 15.5 miles per hour are classified as motor vehicles and require a driving licence, insurance and vehicle tax. Privately owned e-scooters cannot be legally used on public roads or pavements in Scotland, and off-road vehicles like quad bikes are also required for a licence to use on public roads. While the Scottish Government has not so far specifically requested an additional licensing scheme for e-bikes, I recognise that there are calls for further legislation, and that's why I am keen to work with the UK Government on a cross-party basis to explore practical solutions. I know the member says he has raised this twice. I know several members in this chamber have, and myself and Jim Fairley have set up a group with interested MSPs, and I am happy to invite the member to the next meeting.
Very brief supplementary, Sue Webber.
Any e-bike that doesn't meet the electrically pedal-assisted cycle requirements, as you stated, Minister, is classified as a motorcycle or a moped, and that requires that it be registered, taxed, and the rider requires a valid licence and must wear a helmet. But we've seen some of these e-bikes exceed the speeds and are not becoming those electrically pedal-assisted cycles and perhaps be classified as mopeds.
Jim.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Minister outline how how you are working with Police Scotland to ensure that e-bikes that do not meet EPAC are being seized by...
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I assure the member that we support Police Scotland and its partners in dealing with the misuse of vehicles? Enforcement is a matter for Police Scotland, and local policing teams are best identified to identify misuse and work to prevent future incidents. Police have the powers to enforce the law using public disorder or dispersal powers, and as I said, I think I have reached out to the member to be part of the group for off-road vehicles with other MSPs as well.
7 Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taking in response to reports of criminals using drones to infiltrate prisons.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the use of drones to introduce illicit items into our prison estate is a current and credible threat, and it's one which the Scottish Prison Service and myself are taking very seriously. I am pleased to inform the member that the Scottish Prison Service have been trialling preventative measures to negate the risk presented by drones and are evaluating their effectiveness before finalising a targeted approach to this clear and obvious threat to safety within our prisons.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. Details obtained from prisons show that criminals are increasingly using state-of-the-art technology to avoid security. One drone was found full of mobile phone SIM cards, syringes, needles, together with tablets and suspected drugs. Violence amongst inmates will be an inevitable consequence of these drone deliveries. So what action can be put in place to ensure that the lives of hard-working prison officers are protected because of this?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, it's a fair and valid point. If I can perhaps just point to three specific actions amongst many. There are measures to improve infrastructure, such as the piloting of the implementation of new window grilles in some of our larger establishments. There is also targeted reactive measures, which will pilot covert technology to detect when a drone is approaching or entering SPS airspace. And there is also the drone detection pilot called D-Drone that ended earlier this year, and SPS are currently exploring other software and technologies on the market.
Thank you. That concludes portfolio questions on justice and home affairs. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item to allow front benches to change. The next item of business is the debate on motion 17242 in the name of Shirley-Ann Somerville on the UK Government welfare reforms. I'd invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible, and I call on Shirley-Ann Somerville to speak to and move the motion. Cabinet Secretary, around 13 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I move the motion in my name. I want to open this important debate with a message of solidarity. I want all disabled people to know that this Government stands with you in opposing the planned UK Government benefit changes. And I hope everyone here in the Scottish Parliament can come together today to condemn the really callous reforms which aim to save money on the backs of some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Presiding Officer, I think it's important that we begin by reflecting on the purpose of social security and what is the duty of government to its citizens. Social security is an essential safety net made available to everyone. And that everyone is key, because any of us might find ourselves at any point in our lives needing help from that collective safety net if we are unable to get paid work due to sickness, or if we have a disability with all the extra financial costs which disability brings, or indeed because we are caring for a loved one, care which of course reduces demand on wider health and social care resources. The Scottish Government's position stands in sharp contrast to the damaging cuts that are being proposed and indeed begun to be implemented by the UK Government. The UK Government is utterly intent, it would seem, on really unforgivable and stigmatising rhetoric which is already causing great concern and distress, particularly towards people with mental health conditions and indeed other people entitled to help from the benefits system. And as we devolved our benefits system, we put so much effort collectively as a Parliament into reducing stigma and encouraging people to apply to what they're entitled for. And that is deeply disappointing to see the UK Government on a different track. Presiding Officer, I have been in politics for a long, long time now, but I really never thought I would hear Labour ministers referring to people in need of support as, and I quote, taking the mickey. And in the case of the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, going on national television and equating disability benefit payments to the pocket money he pays his children. That reckless language makes life all the harder for disabled people. It increases the barriers to, oh, I apologise, I hear from a sedentary position. Well, that makes it fine, doesn't it? That makes it absolutely fine to actually say things like that, to even have that thought towards a disabled person. It also increases the barriers to accessing support to what people are entitled to. And I'm encouraged by the amount of cross-party opposition to the UK Government's rhetoric. Indeed, I welcome comments from some Labour MSPs and MPs who have stood firm in their values and called on the UK Government to scrap these immoral plans. I am saddened, however, by a number who have remained silent. Now, the decisions taken by the UK Government with the publication of the Pathways to Work Green Paper and a subsequent spring statement not only weaken the UK social security system, but also target some of the most vulnerable people who rely on it. People who do not meet the new PIP threshold will receive far less than they otherwise would be entitled to, and subject to pressure to enter the workforce despite the challenges that society puts in their way. Now, the changes to PIP were announced by the UK Government in advance of any proper consultation, and the current consultation has been described by Benefits and Work as an utterly bogus consultation which refuses to consult on almost everything that matters most to claimants. Presiding Officer, it is important to examine in detail just how damaging these cuts are and the impacts that they will have on people, not just in Scotland, of course, but across the UK too. The Office for Budget Responsibility have confirmed that the UK Government will cut £4.8 billion from benefits in 29/30. The DWP's own impact assessment highlights that by 29/30, 3.2 million families will lose out as a result, with an average loss per family of £1,720 per year. A particularly damning aspect of an already damning set of circumstances is that 96% of those families who are being made worse off include a disabled person. Astonishingly, despite the UK Government's stated aim to reduce child poverty, Their own analysis also estimates that the reforms will push a further 250,000 people, including 50,000 children, into relative poverty by 2029-30. Where that leaves the current UK Government task force on child poverty, I honestly don't know. Now, with half of all children in poverty in Scotland living in a household with a disabled person, these changes threaten to seriously undermine the progress that we are making here in Scotland to end child poverty, and should have every member of this Parliament united in condemnation of the cuts and the impact. And what I also find astonishing is that this exercise is balancing the books on the shoulders of vulnerable people, and it's being carried out because of so-called fiscal rules, which are nothing short and, in fact, are totally self-imposed. A point which has been made by many leading economists and has been echoed by the former Bank of England Deputy Governor Charlie Bean, who described this as a frankly pretty ridiculous position. Well, it is ridiculous, but it's also calamitous, of course, for those affected, and it's no wonder that charities and stakeholders who know most about the impact these cuts will have, they're rightly calling on the UK Government to think again. Macmillan Cancer, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Scope, Mencap, Citizens Advice and dozens more all wrote in a joint letter to the Chancellor on the eve of her statement, urging a change of course. As End Child Poverty said on the day of the statement, and I quote, "This government came to power with a commitment to significantly reduce the number of children living in poverty, and yet the recent proposals to cut disability payments will pull more families into hardship." Presiding Officer, despite our fixed budget and our limited powers, we have transformed social security provision in Scotland. We have established a radically different system which is actively and vigorously working to ensure as many people as possible get the support that they are entitled to. Now, I am delighted to say that yesterday we completed the national launch of the pension age disability payment. This means that people of any age in any part of Scotland will be able to apply for disability assistance from Social Security Scotland, not the DWP. Now, this is an important distinction, as our approach is to ensure that disabled people get the support they are entitled to, whilst making sure that an application process is as straightforward as possible. Once the application is submitted, it then goes through a robust decision-making process. Now, in 25-26, we will invest £3.6 billion in adult disability payment, and that is £314 million more than we are forecasted to receive from the UK Government through the block grant adjustment. However, these planned cuts by the UK Government will lead to further cuts to our budget. Now, we need to take time to work through and fully consider the significant impact this will have, but it will be significant. And the Scottish Government estimates that these reforms will result in the loss of £400 million from the block grant adjustment by 29-30. Now, with that being said, I want to highlight and to reassure the people of Scotland that this Government's social security system will ensure that our fundamental principle of treating people with dignity, fairness and respect will continue to guide this Government's approach. Whilst the UK Government is focusing on reducing the amount of money spent on supporting disabled people and others who need help, this Government believes that social security is an investment in the people of Scotland, in its communities and in all of our futures. An investment because we know inequality is bad for our health, it's bad for our communities and it's bad for our economy. Now, in the recently passed budget, this Scottish Government made a conscious decision to invest in social security for people in Scotland by investing £6.9 billion in benefits and payments for 25-26. Now, behind that big number are the disabled people, the carers and the low-income families that we support. And when people question how much we spend on social security in Scotland, they need to be honest with people if they're asking us to cut that amount, that they are asking us to cut the amount of support that we give to disabled people, carers, low-income families, and they need to be upfront with everyone about which group of those they would wish to see those cuts coming down upon. Now, Presiding Officer, the investment we've made is around £1.3 billion more than the funding we receive from the UK Government for social security, and it supports around 2 million people in total. And I want to be clear that our principles of dignity, fairness and respect also applies to our employability system as well. And our aim is to support people into the right job for the right circumstances at the right time. Through our No One Left Behind approach, person-centred employability services are available in every local authority for people of all ages who experience structural barriers to participating in the labour market. We want our services to be seen as opportunities for participants, not threats. Furthermore, we are committed to halving the disability employment gap and supporting disabled people to access and sustain fair work. That's why we are introducing specialist employment support for disabled people for summer 2025, which will enhance existing provision and support more disabled people to access and sustain meaningful employment. This is in contrast to the contradictory plans of the UK Government, who are looking to push as many people as possible into employment while simultaneously cutting the number of work coaches available to support people. That, to me, does not make sense, Presiding Officer. Now, we're also using our limited budget to mitigate some of the most damaging policies of the UK Government. If I can get some time back, Presiding Officer? Yes.
Craig Hoy. I thank the Minister for giving way, and I accept the point she just made in respect of the UK Government. But hasn't the SNP Government made the same mistake at various points where they've cut funding for employability at the same time as the benefits bill has been rising?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, our benefits bill is not in a matter that is related to whether you're in work or out of work. So with the greatest respect to Mr Hoy, I think he is conflating different issues, because our benefits bill is dictated about whether you're disabled, whether you're a carer or whether you're on low income. And unfortunately, as we often see, many people who rely on the Scottish Child Payment have parents who are actually in employment. So it is important that we do bear in mind the eligibility criteria for our benefits. But of course we want to see people into employment. That's exactly why we have that £90 million within the budget to be able to assist with that. But on the mitigation, Presiding Officer, it is important that we recognise the impact that also has on the Scottish Government budget. £210 million this year. And as we move forward to mitigate the two-child cap in 2026, the modelling estimates that will reduce the number of children living in relative poverty by 20,000, and that will also, of course, have another impact on our budget for social security. Now, we are, of course, committed to ensuring that Scotland's finances remain on a sustainable trajectory, and we will publish our next medium-term financial strategy later next month, alongside a fiscal sustainability delivery plan. But in conclusion, Presiding Officer, it is time for the UK Government to wake up to the reality and the impact that this is already having on the people in our society, particularly disabled people. This is not a viable or credible way to create a strong economy. And it's not too late for them to change course. It's not too late for them to listen to those who will be impacted, as well as the charities, as well as the academics. Listen to that evidence and experience and change their minds. I would therefore call on the UK Government to follow the Scottish Government's lead to protect and enhance the social security safety net, rather than dismantling it, rather than stigmatising people who need support. I go back to the question I raised at the start, Presiding Officer. What is social security for, and what is government for? It is there to protect people, it is there to support people, and that's exactly what this government will continue to do.
Thank you. I now call on Liz Smith to speak to and move Amendment 17242.3. Around 9 minutes. Ms Smith.
Thank you. Can I move the amendment in my name? And can I also put party politics aside just for a minute, Presiding Officer, because I think the recent debates about Labour's welfare changes, highly charged as they have been, and I'm sure we'll see more of the same this afternoon, they've also raised questions about the administrative relationship between reserved and devolved social security policies. And that's because there are very legitimate questions to be asked about how well benefits can be delivered in what has become a highly complex system on which many claimants are dependent upon benefits which are paid by both Westminster and by Holyrood. And of course, what matters is how effective we are in delivering the benefits to help those most in need, to ensure that the system is fair and non-discriminatory, to provide a genuine helping hand rather than a disincentive to work for those who are able, and of course to ensure that it is affordable, around which a great deal of debate has taken place and will continue to take place. As my colleague Jeremy Balfour has said on more than one occasion, we find ourselves in a tangled web of payments from just one agency, which are contingent on the claimant receiving benefits from another agency. And that entanglement, despite the better working relationship between Social Security Scotland and the DWP, makes the possibility of some changes to benefits in Scotland really pretty difficult, because it has an impact on reserved policy making. For example, the changes to PIP designed to save £5 billion in 2026-27, claimants have to score more than 4 points to ensure that, and that's one of the activity areas, to qualify for the daily living component. And at the same time, the eligibility criteria for the health aspect of universal credit will now be determined by a PIP assessment. However, that risks conflation between the additional cost of disability with out-of-work income replacement payments. And as we know, the eligibility criteria within the DWP and within Social Security Scotland have largely been the same, irrespective of the process of engagement between the agency and the claimant. But there is now a question of whether the DWP will actually be able to transfer the ADP or reinstate PIP assessment in Scotland. And all that side might seem very technical, but it matters hugely to our constituents. And I would suggest that there has been some very unhelpful confusion and uncertainty, which means that many constituents, rightly so, as the Cabinet Secretary has referred to, are very unsure of where they stand right now. And so it's here where we come to the politics, because there are obviously some who believe that the problem would be resolved if Social Security was fully devolved to this place. But there are others who might take the opposite view and think it should be rolled back into Westminster. And I'm sure that we can all argue about our different perspectives, and no doubt they will be part of the manifesto discussions for the forthcoming 2026 election. But the fact of the matter is, whatever our views, it's here that we are dealing with the current status quo. So I think it's important that today's debate focuses in that context. And as we do so, I think we have to have two things in mind. Firstly, our ability to help those most in need, and to ensure that there are more sustainable routes back into employment. And what's important here is that the assessment of the evidence tells us what the answer should be, not just our party political perspectives. Which benefits are working well in terms of better outcomes, and why? And which benefits are not working so well? If we're honest, and I think we have to be, it's a very mixed picture, and I'm sure the members of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee know that only too well. So let me now come to Labour's welfare reforms. Now, I quite agree with Liz Kendall when she says that there are very serious issues about welfare. Firstly, the growing number of claimants, and therefore the speed of the increasing benefits bill, and we should not forget that the backdrop in Scotland to that is the fact that we will be facing a £1.3 billion deficit in the block grant adjustment. But secondly, that the current system is not addressing the growing problem of economic inactivity, because we know from the OECD that only a fifth of the countries have a higher rate of inactivity than was the case in the pre-pandemic, and we're on the wrong side of that. Our economic inactivity rate is a problem. And we also know that from the Scottish Health Survey and the DWP Family Resources Survey 2 years ago, in both cases, 34% of Scotland's population was classified as having a disability. And that was compared with 24% in England. So Liz Kendall is quite right to raise these concerns, and I don't believe anyone in any party should deny that, because it is high time that we address the issue of how the current system is avoiding creating the perverse incentives. That's something we can't have. But if social justice is the defining philosophy of the Labour Party, as many of its founding fathers and indeed current MPs have claimed, then it's pretty hard to square that with the spring budget, or the mini-statement, I think, as many commentators rightly preferred to call it. And that's because virtually all social policy commentators are saying that the policies are disproportionately hitting the poor and the more vulnerable. But it's more than that. There's a lack of coherency and planning around Labour's policy making. For example, as moves are made to get more people back into work in some areas, why would you burden employers with higher national insurance charges, which serve only to increase their costs, making it more difficult to hire new labour? And why allow new employment legislation, that's the Employment Rights Act, also to make it more difficult for employers to take on workers? That doesn't make sense to me. Nor importantly does it make sense to people who are genuinely wanting to get back into the labour market. and to all those entrepreneurs who are willing to invest in the necessary training schemes. And Craig Hoy was quite right to point out about the employability aspect of this. But as well as that, I think there's a lack of coherent strategy for the future role of the state, most especially in terms of public sector reform, and our Finance Committee knows all about that. And of course the same can be said in Scotland. There's a lack of a joined-up thinking when it comes to industrial policy, all of that leaving the public rather bewildered and obviously in some cases very angry. Now, I don't pretend for a minute that the previous Conservative government can take any of the moral high ground when it comes to stimulating necessary economic growth, which is so desperately needed to increase GDP. And I've spoken before about the damage of the Johnson and Truss years when it came to the relationship between government and financial institutions. Exactly the same problem that is now to the fore in the United States, and when politics gets in the way of sound economics. And can I say at this stage that that is exactly what is happening with the current very serious debate about higher education funding in Scotland, where sound economics tells us exactly what should be happening, and it isn't because of politics. Now, last Friday, the latest quarterly economic indicator for the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, published in partnership with the Fraser Allender Institute, revealed that business confidence has taken a very serious dent as a result of soaring taxes, increased labour costs, increased energy costs, to say nothing of the impacts of the international trade wars. Doug Smith, Vice President of the Chambers, went as far as to say, and I quote, "The cost of doing business is becoming unsustainable. Employers are being punished in every direction, and he believes that Scotland is losing out on major UK and international contracts because we are increasingly seen as uncompetitive." And he also cites severe warnings about the fact that Scotland doesn't have anywhere near the trained workforce that we have to have in order to ensure that we can move forward. So, Presiding Officer, it's all very well for the SNP to have a go at the Labour about their welfare reforms, and I agree up to a point. But they also need to look closer to home too, not just in terms of the ballooning welfare bill in Scotland, about which Scottish ministers do seem remarkably complacent given the effect on the Scottish budget, but also the news that the current economic conditions are really struggling to bring people back into the workforce. That, to me, is not acceptable. Finally, the Scottish Fiscal Commission has warned of the introduction of light touch reviews in Scotland, the deliberate avoidance of in-person checks, and that is a big factor in rising costs. They point out that only 2% of reviews in Scotland are turned back, where it's 16% in England. I think I'm about... I will.
Very briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah. Can I thank Liz Smith for her contributions, much of which I actually agree with. Can I say, though, that in this aspect it is an unfair comparison, because the 2.2% is to do with cases that were not due for a renewal and we're moving from PIP to ADP, and that's why there is a difference. So I take her point. We need to be careful on that, but I would caution against that comparison.
Liz Smith.
Yeah, we do need to be careful, because it's a real point that has been raised by the Scottish Fiscal Commission. Deputy Presiding Officer, I'm very aware of the saying that all political careers end in failure. That's an adage I'm trying to avoid for at least another year. But I think it is a message to those who are leading governments just now, because when you don't listen to what the public is saying and to what business and some of the best advisors are saying, that's what happens. That is exactly what happens, that your career will end in failure. And that's something that I would strongly urge us to guard against, because we must take this issue about social security very seriously, whether we're in Scotland or whether we're in the UK, because we simply can't go on as we are.
Thank you. I now call on Paul O'Kane to speak to and move Amendment 17242.1 around 7 minutes. Mr O'Kane.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. And in the debate already this afternoon, I think we have acknowledged the complexity of social security and the complexities of a devolved and a reserve system which interact and interlock. And I thought Liz Smith outlined much of that in a credible way, as she always does at the beginning of these debates, and helped us perhaps to focus our thoughts and our comments in this debate this afternoon. Because I do, of course, welcome the opportunity to discuss reform of social security and employment support. And, of course, we have debated these issues many times before in this chamber. And each time we have done that, I have called for a serious debate on the issues. I have done that consistently throughout my time in Parliament, particularly, as I say, in terms of the devolved social security system, which we collectively as a Parliament are responsible for, and which the government brings forward its policies on. Because there are serious questions, I think, to be asked and answered about how we support people into good work and how our social security systems are built with resilience for the longer term. And we know some of the significant challenges that will exist in terms of demographic pressures and the wider issues. And of course, I want to begin this afternoon by recognising the concerns that have been expressed on some of the proposed reforms and acknowledge, as I have in my amendment, the need for consultation, for listening, for ensuring that any reform to social security, whether across the UK or here in Scotland, is fair. It's balanced by looking at how we support people into work, because that is a right and good thing to do, and it should be the aspiration, I think, of us all in this Parliament. Helping people when they are in work to thrive, and also supporting those who cannot work and those who will not work. I'll give way to Liz Smith.
Liz Smith. I entirely agree with that point, but how does that sit with the UK Labour government's intention to put more and more costs onto employers, who are the very people who can help people back into work?
Paul O'Kane.
Well, Liz Smith and I have debated the national insurance increase before, as she has with Mr Mara and others in this chamber, and that choice was made because we chose not to put the burden of taxation onto working people and onto individuals, and instead to ensure that this Parliament, for example, could receive that £5 billion uplift in the budget. And those are decisions we have made, and those are decisions which we have debated in this chamber. So I think the reality is we have to look at this system in the round, and we have to look at the issues in the round, and I think that's what part of this debate should be about today. And as I say, I have recognised the concerns, and I think if we're going to have a serious debate on the issues, I do not think that the government motion, which effectively calls for the UK government to scrap the Green Paper in its entirety, in all of its parts, is a particularly credible way to go about it. Because rather than looking at separate reforms it has proposed, and the Cabinet Secretary outlined in her contribution her issue with many of those, I don't think you can just take the entire paper and throw out everything that is contained within it. I'll take the Cabinet Secretary.
Cabinet Secretary.
Grateful to remember giving me. The day before these proposals were unveiled, Mr O'Kane and I were on a panel together, and he didn't want to speculate. We don't have to speculate anymore. We know what is being proposed and what's being consulted on. So, to pick one example, does he agree that there shouldn't be any health top-up paid to people under 22? And if he does agree with it, exactly what are they supposed to do in that time period with no money coming in?
Paul O'Kane.
Well, the point I was just about to make is that the Green Paper contains a range of proposals, and the Cabinet Secretary wants now to pick and choose and have a debate on individual proposals, and yet in her motion that she set down, she wants to scrap the paper in its entirety and not have a broader debate about the issues contained therein. Now, the reality is, in terms of people under 22, there are nuanced issues within that cohort of young people, and we have to look at how, for example, do we increase the age at which people receive support and receive differential support. So moving that, for example, from 18 to 16 and looking at how people get more support in the round. I think that's important. I think in terms of supporting people into work, and I'll come on to talk about this, we have to ensure that the investment the government is making, the UK government is planning to make in terms of £1 billion to support people into work, is focused on young people, because we know there is a huge challenge in terms of that cohort of young people that if they do not work by the time they are 24, it's very unlikely that they will work. But as I have outlined, I think it's important that those people who cannot work are given the support they need to live. So I am concerned that we're not having a rounded debate, and we've decided that the government's motion has decided that the Green Paper should be completely dismissed out of hand, because that would mean, for example, that we are not looking at increasing the payment rate for the standard allowance of universal credit, which will benefit people who are out of work. It would mean abandoning any proposals to scrap the work capability assessment, something which has been long called for by many campaigners seeking reform of the social security system. It would mean, for example, example, failing to progress on any proposals to introduce a right to try work, which would allow individuals to attempt employment without the risk of losing the social security that they rely on. And it would, as I've said already, mean failing to advance the plan to invest £1 billion into employability support to make sure that people are properly supported in sustainable, well-paid employment. So I am disappointed that we're not having that broader debate today. And look, I think it's right that we also focus on what is happening here in Scotland, and the Cabinet Secretary in her contribution made reference to employability here in Scotland and the work that is being done. But we do know at present there are 84,000 young people in Scotland who are not in education, employment or training. We also know that thanks to research by Spice and Fraser Allander, that the disabled employment gap in Scotland is wider than in the rest of the UK. And we know that nearly 300,000 working age people are out of work because of illness in Scotland. And at the same time as... I'll take Mr Balfour.
Chairman Balfour. I'm grateful to remember, and clearly all of us want to see more people into employment, particularly those with disability. But does she recognise that to get more people to employment does not necessarily then mean that ADP or PIP payments would reduce? Because the point of ADP and PIP is to help those with disability get into employment, and thus there is no necessarily cut in ADP just because more people are in employment. Paul O'Kane.
I'm very grateful to Mr Balfour for his intervention, and I was just coming on to talk about ADP and PIP and trying to understand, I think, our devolved context in terms of adult disability payment, because the reforms to PIP are at a UK level. I think we've already explored that in the opening contributions. But ADP is devolved to this Parliament, and it is for this Parliament to decide on adult disability payment where that goes in the future and in terms of the sustainability. And I do, of course, accept the points that have been made about the interconnectedness of payments and of the gateway payments that I think Liz Smith and others referred to. And there will, of course, have to be proper consultation and communication on that from the DWP to the Scottish Government as well. But going back to the point about employability, I mean, it is extremely important that we have a focus on that here in Scotland, because at the same time as we have faced the challenges I outlined prior to Mr Balfour's intervention, we have a devolved Job Start payment that only has an uptake rate of 21%. We've seen significant cuts in recent years to the Scottish Government's employability budgets of around £30 million. So there is a serious debate to be had about the need for reform of the system more generally, and it's a shame that I don't think the Scottish Government are particularly stepping up to that debate either today or more widely. So to draw my remarks to a conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, Labour believes in the dignity of secure employment, recognising it is the most sustainable route out of poverty for those who can work, but we must protect those who cannot. And I would encourage everyone to engage constructively in the consultation and the process, even those reforms that will be carried out both at a UK and a Scottish level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr O'Kane. I now call Maggie Chapman to open on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This afternoon's debate is a call to conscience. The Scottish Green Party believes in building a society where everyone can live with dignity, a society with compassion, equality and social justice embedded in every aspect of public policy, where we stand up in solidarity with those marginalised and minoritised by various intersecting systems of oppression. The UK Government's latest welfare reform proposals betray that vision. These reforms are not only technically flawed, they are, in our opinion, morally indefensible. If implemented, they will devastate the lives of millions, particularly disabled people, carers, and young people already teetering on the brink of, if not in, poverty. Let's be clear about what's on the table. The UK Government's Pathways to Work Green Paper outlines sweeping changes to disability benefits that would result in the most brutal package of cuts since George Osborne's austerity years. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, these reforms aim to cut nearly £7 billion annually from benefits paid to disabled people and carers. But savings for the Treasury mean staggering losses for real people. Nearly half of all current recipients of Personal Independence Payment, PIP, 1.3 million disabled people, stand to lose their daily living component. This isn't a minor policy tweak. It is a mass removal of essential support from people who, for example, cannot dress, wash or feed themselves or use the toilet unaided. Imagine telling someone who needs help to eat or shower that they no longer qualify for support, because they didn't score 4 points in a specific bureaucratic box. This is cruelty by spreadsheet. The devastating consequences ripple further. Under these reforms, only those who qualify for the PIP daily living component will be eligible for the health element of universal credit. In one cruel stroke, more than 1.4 million disabled people will be denied both forms of support. These individuals face losing upwards of £8,500 per year. That is not a policy adjustment. That is an engineered descent into poverty. In Scotland, we talk about leaving no one behind, but these proposals flip that on its head. They punish those who are too unwell to work, often stripping them of the minimal support that allows them to survive. And there is no evidence, none at all, that these cuts will achieve the UK government's stated goal of getting people into work. Even if the Office for Budget Responsibility could not estimate any employment gain from these reforms. In fact, previous benefit cuts of similar scope led to only a 3% rise among disabled people. These proposals also disproportionately impact carers, the vast majority of whom are women. Up to 150,000 carers stand to lose carers allowance or the carers element of universal credit. That's not just bad policy, it is gendered injustice, stripping away the financial independence of those who already shoulder an immense burden of unpaid labour. Scotland, with its devolved powers, has tried to chart a different course. The Scottish Government has rooted its approach to social security in dignity and respect. Programmes like adult disability payment reflect a commitment to compassion. It's not the panacea that we need, but even that progressive framework is under attack, because Scotland's funding for ADP is tied to eligibility rates for PIP in England and Wales. So any reduction in claimants there will mean massive funding shortfalls here, estimated at over £500 million. Unless the Scottish Government follows suit with equally harsh eligibility cuts, it may not be allowed to use ADP as a passporting benefit for universal credit. That would leave thousands of disabled Scots unable to access much-needed financial support. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation estimates that these reforms could push an additional 400,000 people into poverty, including at least 50,000 children. And let's not forget the wider context. Disabled people are already overrepresented amongst those in poverty. 63% of people experiencing destitution reporting a disability or long-term health condition. These reforms will only deepen those disparities. And this isn't just about policy, it's about human dignity. It's about the lived reality of people like the disabled GDA member who said, "Every day is a battle. From the moment I wake up, I'm continuously faced with these awful decisions. I'm hungry, but I've nothing much there. Can't really get out anywhere. No money to do anything anyway." When we talk about welfare, we must remember what that word means. The well-being of people, not fiscal manipulation, not political point scoring, real human well-being. The UK government reforms offer none of that. They don't see the person behind the form. They see only numbers to be reduced, lines on a balance sheet to be erased. But we see differently. We see people, we see families, we see communities. And we see the truth that these cuts will devastate lives. That's why I and the Greens will oppose them with everything we can. This debate is not just about benefits. It's a question about what kind of country we want to be. Will we let the most vulnerable pay the price for political cowardice and economic misdirection? Or will we rise in solidarity to say, enough? Now is the time to choose justice, to fight for dignity, to stand with disabled people, with carers, with the countless lives hanging in the balance. We cannot let them fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I now call on Willie Rennie to open on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Up to 6 minutes, please.
This debate is about a number of competing challenges. It's about dignity for disabled people, particularly those in poverty. It's about balancing the books. It's about being able to pay for that. It's about the value of work and the contribution that makes to the individual's well-being, but also to society's well-being. And it's also about the long-term financial sustainability of the country. And these are all very difficult competing challenges. So I think the starting point for this debate and the Green Paper is that it's actually a good title, Pathways to Work, because work is a good thing. But I'm afraid it quickly loses the direction because it's not the primary focus of the paper. The primary focus of the paper is financial, and I wish we would have a much more longer-term approach to welfare and social security and work, because we make a number of short-term decisions that don't lead to the long-term benefits that we're trying to seek. And I think the Pathway to Work Green Paper simply transfers the financial stress that the country is feeling onto the individuals and the households in which they live. The increases in poverty that I think the UK Government have already acknowledged will happen will become real, but it also displaces the costs onto the NHS, onto social care, onto food banks, onto charities, in a number of different areas. So we're not actually saving money, we're just transferring the problem somewhere else. And although it is a Green Paper, and Paul O'Kane is right when he says there is a consultation and people should engage in it, it's pretty clear what the UK Government want to try and do, and that is causing significant anxiety for a number of people who literally feel helpless through this debate. So the impact, many of our contributors in terms of briefings for today's debate have set out quite clearly what the consequences will be. The fact that 70% of the households with a disabled person in them are on some of the lowest incomes. The CAB have said people already struggle to make ends meet when they are on support. The Resolution Foundation's talked about the PIP entitlement and the direct cost to individuals as a result of the changes. All of that is pretty stark. But there are some positives in the paper. I think the right to try work, I think, is a good thing. I think the fear that many people fear and feel when they think about going for an opportunity of employment, they fear about what will happen if they try to get back onto benefits. And I understand if they're entitled to disability benefits, that they get them on the basis of their disability rather than their work. But there are many other benefits that they are entitled to that they fear losing. So I think the right to try is a good initiative, and I hope that message gets through. The extra employment package of £1 billion is a good thing, and the Disability Facilities Grant is also good. But at the centre of this debate is the financial sustainability of the country, because we are facing a number of different challenges. The demographic challenge has been known for decades, and we haven't, frankly, done an awful lot about it. But it has been there, and it continues to face us. And the financial consequences of that will be severe. But now we have also got the economic inactivity challenge that's coming. So we've got 16 to 64-year-olds, plus older people who are retired, just not in the workplace, contributing to the financial well-being of the country. Meanwhile, our demands are ever greater, and that really poses a significant financial challenge to the country. Now, it once was the case that in the 80s and 90s, middle-aged white men primarily from working-class communities found themselves on various forms of incapacity benefit. Those people were lost to the workforce, but also to the financial well-being of the country. They weren't paying their taxes as a result of being on those benefits. Now that challenge has changed. It is younger people who have mental health, autism, ADHD, a variety of different conditions. Now, if those young people are not in the workplace for the rest of their life, the financial challenge is just enormous. But we are not set up to challenge this. Now, if I give you a particular example around about the NHS. Now, of course, health inequalities are not all about health, but the NHS has got a big role to play in making sure we can get people back into the workplace. But simply, autism services are just nowhere. There is no proper support across the country. In fact, we're going in the wrong direction, particularly for young people, in terms of getting autism support. Mental health, the waits have come down, but that's been replaced by long waits for autism services. And there was a young man I heard about recently who was when he was at school, he was receiving support for his ADHD. When he became an adult, that was withdrawn. He went off the rails. He was out of the workplace. Talented young man, could contribute significantly. Trying to get back on to get medicine and support again, he's got a 3-year wait before he even sees somebody. Now, he could be contributing to the workplace, but he's not able to because the NHS isn't set up to. And I would challenge the decision makers within the NHS to make the right decisions about the real challenges we've got in economic inactivity. We need to shape the support to make sure we can get all these people back to work who are capable of working if we can give them the right support. Now, I wish there was as much energy in debating that as there is about debating other aspects of social security, which are right to debate. But unless we deal with the economic inactivity in the country, we will double our problems alongside our demographic challenges. That's why I hope the government, and I'm pleased the Health Secretary is here to listen to this, because it is really important that we fully understand the financial challenge that the country faces. Unless we deal with it now, we're going to have many, many problems in years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. We will now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of up to 6 minutes. I call Colette Stevenson to be followed by Ros McCall. Ms Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Since the election last year, the Labour UK government has failed to compensate WASPy women. They scrapped winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners, and now they are plotting to cut disability benefits. Labour should listen to poverty groups, disabled people's organisations and many others and scrap these outrageous cuts. But if they plough ahead, the Westminster government will harm the most vulnerable, push more disabled people into poverty and mark the start of a new era of austerity cuts under the Labour Party. So despite offering change in the election just last year, Keir Starmer's government has kept some of the worst aspects of Tory welfare reforms, in particular the two-child cap and rate clause. They have also kept strict Tory fiscal rules, meaning further cuts than the Tories even dared to, both winter fuel payments and now disability benefits. The Resolution Foundation highlighted that the Labour Chancellor was wrong to concentrate the pain so heavily on a relatively small number of disability benefit claimants. Their analysis also shows that the poorest 50% of households are set to become £500 a year poorer over the next 5 years, thanks to Labour's spring statement. Presiding Officer, let's look at what is happening under an SNP Scottish Government. According to experts at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Scotland is set to be the only part of the UK to see a decline in child poverty rates in the coming years, with a growing gap between child poverty rates in Scotland and Labour-run England and Wales. The JRF said that this is in large part due to Scotland-specific policies, including the game-changing Scottish Child Payment. Of course, the Scottish budget for this year gives funding to develop the systems necessary to effectively scrap the two-child cap next year. This decision by the SNP government will lift a further 15,000 children out of poverty. And in contrast, Labour's decision to keep the two-child cap is putting more than 100,000 more children into poverty every single day. Yes?
Jeremy Barber.
I'm grateful to remember, and I agree with the Cabinet Secretary that social security is a social investment, but social investment has to be paid for. And we do have this £1 billion deficit coming down the road. So if we're going to continue with these policies, which budget does she suggest there is the money taken from to pay for this social security investment? Is it education? Is it transport? Which budget would she take to pay for these reforms?
Colette Stevens.
Thanks to the member for that intervention. And at the heart of it, it's about political choices and also social security being a human right as well. And I'm going to come on and touch upon that as well. So the DWP's own analysis has shown their welfare reform agenda would push another 250,000 people into poverty including 50,000 children. The Labour government has been criticised for both the announcement on welfare reform and its lack of detail. It is disappointing that the UK government failed to engage with the Scottish government in advance, and the results could be disastrous. The Westminster government seems to have glossed over the fact that Scotland, thankfully, has some powers over social security, so there are practical issues around how Scottish disability benefits will tie into the UK government's universal credit system. As well as that, Scotland's budget could be reduced if we get yet more Westminster cuts. Glasgow Disability Alliance is completely against the proposals, saying the attacks on disabled people are many, are brutal and are multifaceted. In an excellent but hard-hitting briefing, they set out the severe consequences on household finances for disabled people. And they also state that it will be extremely difficult for the Scottish Government to fully mitigate these changes. And on a practical level, the Glasgow Disability Alliance mentioned the UK Government's Green Paper fails to set out how disabled people in receipt of the Scottish Adult Disability Payment will qualify for the health element of universal credit. They also estimate that Scotland's budget could be cut by £1 billion per year, and they warn that the DWP might try to claw back money from Social Security Scotland if Scottish disability benefits remain better than those on offer south of the border. Marie Curie have called for clarity from the UK Government on whether terminally ill people who claim universal credit will be required to take part in any work-related activity or be at risk of any sanctions. I don't have time to mention other stakeholders, but it is clear that the Labour government's proposed welfare reforms are ill thought out, both in terms of practicality and in terms of being abhorrent as well. So to conclude, the UK government should not be making these cuts. Keir Starmer, Liz Kendall and Anna Sarwar should listen to disabled people's organisations and poverty groups and think again. By taking these decisions, the Labour government has chosen to box itself in with its Tory austerity rules. Instead of reviewing PIP assessments and reintroducing mandatory reassessments, the UK government should instead follow the lead of the Scottish Government and treat disabled people with respect. With the Labour UK Government showing no signs of changing course, it is more urgent than ever that Scotland becomes an independent country so that we have the full powers needed to tackle poverty and create a fairer and more equal Scotland.
Thank you, Ms Stevenson. I now call Ros McCall to be followed by Claire Adamson. Ms McCall.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be speaking in this debate, and I'll be directing my remarks to the Scottish Conservative amendment in the name of Liz Smith. As the amendment correctly highlights the concerns from both the Office of Budget Responsibility and the Scottish Fiscal Commission about the projected substantial increases in UK and Scottish welfare budgets, the resulting fiscal pressures and the unsustainability of these budgets in the current economic circumstances. And that's the fundamental issue before us. Regardless of which government proposals we're discussing, the tone of the debate, which has been conciliatory up till now, the debating vigour displayed in this chamber, or even the verbal tongue lashings or contained heckling, it won't make an iota of difference to the people of Scotland. It will do nothing to stop their lives becoming harder. It will do nothing to stop them becoming poorer. It will do nothing to reinstall their faith in the decisions made by their governments on their behalf. In this current economic climate, there are simply insufficient funds. The Scottish Fiscal Commission estimate from January, in the statement from January this year, they said that the Scottish Government will be spending £1.7 billion more than they receive to pay the devolved welfare by 2029-2030. And this, coupled with Labour's welfare cuts, has the deficit growing to £2.1 billion. And it will be hard-working, middle-income taxpayers that will be made to pay. They will be squeezed yet again to support the ever-increasing welfare state, and it will be done at the expense of everything they are trying to do to make their lives better for them and for their children. Surely it would be better to increase the number of taxpayers and grow the economy rather than force those already stretched to pay more. We've already listened to the comments regarding economic inactivity, and I find myself once again speaking in a debate on welfare in Scotland and returning to the report produced by the Social Justice and Social Security Committee on parental employment. This was such a good report with a clear direction of travel to help working parents back into employment, highlighting 3 specific areas that the government could focus on that would help parents back into work. Not only would they be earning a living that statistically would not only boost their disposable income, but would enhance their own mental health, but it would add to the government's revenue by increasing tax take and reduce the number of dependents on welfare payments. Now, we agree that welfare payments is an investment in our people and that the returns and benefits for society are evident, but part of that investment must be to better people's lives in all ways possible. And one of those is self-sufficiency. There is a pride that comes from being self-reliant. I will. Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
To the member for giving way. Would he perhaps agree with her colleague, Jeremy Balfour, who pointed out earlier on in the debate that the ADP is not linked to, nor should it be linked to, employment. It's about the additional cost of a disability or a long-term condition. So the savings that are claimed to be getting made that will impact on the Scottish Government budget, we're talking about 2 different things here, and that's really important because we cannot pretend that a saving on ADP or PIP will actually help people get into work. They're 2 very different things.
Ros McCall.
And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that intervention. And the Cabinet Secretary and Mr Balfour have made that point exceptionally well. And I'm not trying to state that my point is connected to that, but there is a need to look at economic inactivity, of which getting parents back into work is part of that. There is a pride that comes from being self-reliant, from providing for oneself and one's family, and unfortunately, Deputy Presiding Officer, the holistic approach to moving back to work is simply failing. I call again on the Government to actively make the necessary changes to transport, childcare and education that will rectify these issues. It's simply not possible for parents to get back into a fulfilling position or job if we don't get the basics right. So many jobs start before the buses are even running, or shift patterns finished when local transport drops to intermittent services. Pre-7 a.m. shift starts are commonplace now in hospitality, retail, warehousing, manufacturing. But getting to work is a nightmare if you rely on public transport. That needs to change. And childcare provisions for these jobs are completely useless. Drop-offs and pick-up times will simply not accommodate shifts, adding additional expense and unnecessary inconvenience, and that needs to change. And let's say a parent wants to retrain in something that would be a much-needed profession. The courses are there, the colleges will do what they can to modify times and the days. We've had 5 colleges doing exactly that. But once again, the double whammy of transport and childcare will make it almost impossible for parents to attend without being financially penalised in some way. It cannot be right that people who want to work are being forced out of taking a job because we in this place don't fix the issues, especially when they're in our gift to do so. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, we can call upon the UK Government to reverse their plans and we can wax lyrical about the injustice. We can sow yet more division, obfuscate and play the blame game, and all the while the people of Scotland are pushed to the breaking point. Instead of standing in this chamber mudslinging, we should be looking at what we can do to make people's lives better. Look at what we control and ensure that what we do is done to support the people that we are charged to work for. If the solutions have been provided and the outcome is not only clear but will help people achieve what they want to achieve for themselves, outcomes that will not only support our economy, grow the government revenue and reduce the reliance on the state and benefit Scotland and Scots alike, then I urge the Government to seriously look at this again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McCall. I now call Claire Adamson to be followed by Claire Baker. Ms Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just before I open, I have to say that I'm a bit incredulous at the lack of humility this afternoon, given that the reason Labour have said that they're making these cuts is the ridiculous Liz Truss budget that crashed the economy and left additional black holes that even Labour weren't anticipating when they came into power. Presiding Officer, let's not dance about it. These welfare reforms are appalling. Shamelessly trying to balance the books on the back of the sick and disabled is just not plausible. If I channel Mr Kinnock from a previous conference debate that I remember well, this is coming from a Labour government abandoning the most vulnerable. Strategies Labour used to oppose when it was the Tories in charge, they now enthusiastically support in cuts to social security. The only change I see is the final erosion of Labour values. Presiding Officer, these cuts will hurt hard the people in my Motherwell and Militia constituency. And I quote, "Partly owing to our industrial heritage, my constituency had relatively high levels of disability and chronic illness as a result of old injuries and from those days. And that has made my community particularly vulnerable to welfare cuts." Not my words, Presiding Officer, the words of Labour MP for Airdrie at the time and now Labour MP for Motherwell, Wishaw and Carluke, Pamela Nash. But those words of condemnation of cuts came when it was George Osborne and the Tories cutting critical social security support for disabled people. Now that it's the Labour Party doing it, so many Labour MPs have abandoned their principles and their constituents. I've been accused of scaremongering on this issue. This is not about scaremongering. This is about standing up for people who are facing the imposition of poverty by design and by Labour. Are anti-poverty charities scaremongering? Are sick and disabled people who fear for their financial security scaremongering? It bears repeating that the UK Government's own analysis has shown that their welfare cuts will push 250,000 people into poverty, including 50,000 children. The Resolution Foundation said that the cuts would result in between 800,000 and 1.2 million people losing support of between 4,200 and 6,300 a year by 2930. This is falling hard on disabled families. And from the previous work in this Parliament on the Tories' welfare reform, we know the impact that this significantly has on single-parent families too. Many of whom are women. Evidence from Citizens Advice Network in Scotland shows that disabled people are already finding their income is not enough to live on. The proposed reforms will result in a reduction of £5 billion in social security expenditure. In the words of Citizens Advice Scotland, this will further entrench the disproportionate impact of poverty and destitution on disabled people. It will also result in costs elsewhere in society: crisis care, breakdown of care packages, NHS, poverty and homelessness. We've become too used to talking about mitigation in this chamber. I've often talked about it under the guise of devolution. The notion that devolution is about making different policy choices. But some of the unionist persuasion often make the argument that, while casually ignoring the impact of budgetary decisions made at a UK level on Scotland, the UK Government's cut spending is a reduction in Scotland's spending, and we're just told to lump it. We have become almost numb to the concept of mitigating the worst impacts of Westminster policy decisions. So what real choice do we have? We can't abandon people to the worst excesses of the UK austerity, so we have to spend that money, but it comes at a cost to our fixed budget. Labour could end that cycle by taking meaningful actions on policies which are driving people into poverty. But instead, they have chosen to cut, just like their Tory predecessors. And Labour's rhetoric teaches people with hostility and suspicion, rather than with compassion or respect. In the last 14 years, the SNP Scottish Government has invested a staggering £1.2 billion shielding Scots from the worst impacts of Westminster policy. discretionary housing payments, the Scottish Welfare Fund, money advice services, universal credit for Scotland's choices. We invest in the programmes that counter the bedroom tax, the benefit cap and the worst of Westminster austerity. And we brought in the Scottish Child Payment to lift children out of poverty. Now Labour is choosing to push children into poverty. Is this the limit of their ambition when they are in power? But there's another aspect of all of this. When we talk about, yes, getting more people into economic activity would be good. Yes, it will be of benefit to people who will find that independence through the working process. But when we stand back and blame them and not ask the question as to why inequality is rising, this is not an impact on everyone equally. The rich are getting richer, and Labour have chosen to try and balance the book on the backs of the most vulnerable. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Adamson. I now call Claire Baker to be followed by Gordon MacDonald. Ms Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I will begin where I think we can find some level of agreement across the Chamber. Employment is good for individuals and their families. Good jobs provide dignity, purpose and build confidence. They provide opportunities for advancement and promotion. They bring resources into local communities and they disrupt generational poverty and a reliance on benefits. Labour is the party of workers and the UK Labour Government has made clear its commitment to making work pay. This month's increase to national minimum wages and the national living minimum wage by more than inflation has delivered a pay increase for over 3 million workers, including 1 million in hospitality and retail and many young workers and apprentices. Raising pay for those on lower incomes helps deliver better job security, more cash in the pockets of workers and more being spent in our economy. We can all also agree that our public services are under financial pressure. Our NHS requires more and more resources to support its hard-working staff and provide services. There are increasing demands on our NHS, which is the largest proportion of our public spending. There is evidence that long waiting times in NHS are contributing to the levels of people who are receiving benefits in Scotland. All other services, education, justice, transport, are in need of reform to make them fit for a changing world. In this context, both in the UK and in Scotland, we are facing increasing growth in our social security budgets, which experts are warning are unsustainable. We should be able to agree on the challenge faced by both governments in public spending. The Green Paper is the UK Government's response, and it is now out for consultation. Other parties may disagree, but they can't ignore the question, and it's unclear what the Scottish Government's response is to warnings from the Scottish Fiscal Commission and what it intends to do about it. Today's Government motion focuses on the social security changes, but it's vital we look at this in the round, not in isolation. These proposals from the UK Government come as part of a wider reform of a failing system that was inherited from the previous Conservative administration, a system that has trapped some people in a life of inactivity instead of supporting them into employment. The figures quoted in the Government motion are calculated on the assumption that everything else stays the same, which is not the intention. They do not take account of the aims to bring more people into the workplace and reduce the reliance on benefits. The Child Poverty Task Force will introduce measures to tackle child poverty. Briefly.
Cabinet Secretary.
For the avoidance of any doubt, PIP and ADP has nothing to do with whether you're in employment or not. And the conflation between these two issues and this attempt at thinking these savings are going to somehow help people into employment is incorrect. And if anything, it will push people out of employment because you're taking away financial support to them.
Claire Baker.
Listen, I don't think Cabinet Secretary, listen to me, I'm not conflating the two. I'm talking about the child poverty figures and what we are doing to address child poverty and arguing that you can't see the figures just in isolation. The Child Poverty Task Force will introduce measures to tackle child poverty, such as the rollout of free breakfast clubs, which the first schools in England are benefiting from this month. This is the kind of promise that will support working parents and mean every child can start the day ready to learn, as well as helping with the cost of living and impacting on those in poverty. Free universal school breakfast provision is something the SNP promised for primary school children ahead of the last election, so I would hope they would welcome the UK Government's progress in this area. It should also be recognised that UK social security spending is due to increase, that more resources will be spent on social security.
The £5 billion reduction is in projected spend if no changes were to be introduced, as a projected future decline in the budget. The changes proposed for PIP will not apply in Scotland. As has been recognised, we have the devolved benefit of ADP, and there is no requirement to match the change to policy. While the funding for these two benefits are connected, there is no change in the Scottish budget this year or projected next year. If after that period a gap occurs, it will be for the Scottish Government to make decisions about funding allocations and where they will find the additional resources required. Areas in the Green Paper that do apply to Scotland include changes to the work capability assessment, where a solution does need to be found that makes sure it works with the diverging systems. While employability support is devolved, the additional investment from the UK Government to create a guarantee of personalised employment, health and skills support is welcome. After the cuts we have seen to employability in Scotland, this is an area where we need to see a focus. Scotland has an estimated economic inactivity rate of 22.9%, which is higher than the UK rate. The Scottish Government target of halving the disability employment gap by 2038 from the 2016 baseline of 37.4%. We have this target because we recognise that many disabled people do want to work, and while some progress has been made, there is a clear need for further action to deliver on this commitment. We know that with the right support, people can thrive at work. The Green Paper's try-first approach is positive. Often people won't try work because they worry about losing their benefits and having to reapply if it doesn't work out. In my time as convener of the Economy and Fair Work Committee, the inquiry into the disability employment gap heard that while progress was made, it was stalling, and more focus has to be delivered to groups with learning disabilities and those who are neurodivergent. I welcome that the First Minister recently visited the usual space in Dumfries, who gave evidence to the committee. This is a fantastic project which supports young people into employment, but they are under financial pressure to stay open. Rather than having them struggle to stay open, it should be a model that is replicated across Scotland so all young people have the experience of employment and are provided with the skills to stay in employment. An inquiry found that neurodiverse people can be among the furthest from the workplace, but they have so much more to offer. I am also disappointed to see that Dovetail Enterprises in Dundee has collapsed into administration with 47 job losses. The business provided valuable work for people who are often unfairly unable to find employment. Supported employers are a valuable option for many people that provide dignity, purpose and friendship, as well as a supportive community, but we've seen an erosion of these workplaces for a number of years, and the opportunity to maximise the opportunities for public procurement has passed. Every effort must be made to support workers to find future, meaningful employment if we are to have a strong economy and vibrant local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Baker. I now call Gordon MacDonald to be followed by Craig Coy. Mr MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Since 2010, the UK Tory Government and now UK Labour Government embarked on a brutal austerity programme slashing billions from welfare payments. The Tories introduced a 4-year freeze in benefits between 2016 and 2020, introduced the 2-child limit and forced single parents to work when their children were younger. Under the Tories, the Resolution Foundation told us each year since 2010 working-age families lost an average of £1,500. Larger families with 3 or more children were hit hardest, losing £4,600. Out-of-work households faced losses of £2,200, and the 2-child limit pushed 51% of 3 or more children into poverty. This was not fiscal prudence, it was a calculated assault on those least able to bear it. We finally got rid of the blue Tories last year, but the hope that Labour promised in the run-up to the general election has turned into a nightmare, and it appears likely that the red Tories will continue to inflict further misery on the most vulnerable in our society. The people of Edinburgh, Pentlands and communities across Scotland will bear the brunt of this UK Labour Government's callous and misguided cuts to welfare benefits. Let us be clear, a cut of £6.5 billion from ill and disabled people by 2029-30 is not a mere adjustment, nor a tweak to a system in need of reform. These are deliberate, ideological choices that strike at the heart of our social fabric, eroding the safety net that protects our most vulnerable and punishing those who can least afford it. And it's being delivered by a Labour Party that is supposed to be the party of the people. Former Labour MSP Cara Hilton, now of the Trussell Trust, said, driving through record cuts to social security for disabled people to balance the books is both shocking and appalling. An ex-Labour MSP, Neil Findlay, stated, "Labour lied to the British people at the last election and regularly betrays the people who voted for it." Presiding officer, in my constituency, I hear daily from families struggling to make ends meet, from pensioners forced to choose between heating and eating, and from disabled people whose dignity is being stripped away by a system that views them as a burden rather than valued members of society. These are not faceless statistics. These are our neighbours, our friends, our families, and they deserve better than a Labour government intent on balancing its books on their backs. And the Scottish Trade Union Congress agrees, stating that the Chancellor had choices. She could have increased taxes on corporations or the wealthy. Instead, she has rushed through deeply damaging cuts to support for disabled people. This is policy on the hoof, and it is our most vulnerable who are bearing the brunt. Leading disabled people's organisations and women's groups are so concerned that dozens of joint letters to Rachel Reeves about restrictions on eligibility for personal independence payments, which will impact people with complex and multiple conditions. The Child Poverty Action Group estimates that these restrictions will cost some claimants over £100 a week. No wonder they are concerned, as PIP is supposed to be a non-means tested allowance to cover the extra cost of disability or health conditions, regardless of employment status. People in Scotland who are receiving PIP are partially shielded as Social Security Scotland has migrated over to the adult disability payment. However, both the Scottish Government and the Fraser Allender Institute estimate that the budget at Holyrood, as a result of welfare changes, will be cut by hundreds of millions of pounds by 2029. Then there is universal credit. The Institute of Fiscal Studies has warned that the cuts to universal credit and other benefits will push an additional 400,000 people into poverty across the UK by 2026. Labour are freezing the value of the health element of universal credit until 29/30, which is estimated to cost eligible claimants £47 per week. The restriction of the health element of universal credit to people over 22 years means young claimants face a loss of £97 a week. Compare that with the SNP Scottish Government, which with its limited powers has introduced measures like the Scottish Child Payment, lifting thousands of children out of poverty. We have protected free prescriptions, free tuition and free personal care, policies that reflect our belief in a society that cares for all. But we cannot mitigate every blow from Westminster. The block grant, squeezed year after year, limits our ability to shield Scots from the worst of these cuts. This chamber should come together and say enough is enough. Scotland deserves the power to make its own choices, to build a welfare system rooted in compassion and respect, not punishment and neglect. We demand the full powers of an independent nation to protect Scots from the cruelty of Labour and Tory welfare policies. The people of Scotland are watching. They see a UK government that prioritises profit over people, that governs for the few at the expense of the many. But they also see a Scotland that dares to dream of something better, a nation that values every citizen, that builds a future where no one is left behind. Let us stand together, reject these shameful cuts and fight for the fairer, kinder society our people deserve, which can only now be delivered through independence.
Thank you, Mr MacDonald. I now call Craig Hoy to be followed by Marie McNair. Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. This has been an interesting debate so far. I listened carefully to Maggie Chapman and her lecture based on dignity and respect, and it is a pity that she doesn't show that same commitment to the dignity and respect to the rule of law
to our Supreme Court and to the women who need and want safe spaces in Scotland. And I also listened carefully to Claire Adamson. And until that point in this debate, I think it had been fair-minded and reasonable. And so can I quote Neil Kinnock back to her and say that I think it was sad and regrettable that she sought to play politics with people's lives and people's benefits. And the same can go for Gordon MacDonald seeking to turn this important debate and this complex debate into a constitutional one. Now, I can share with the Cabinet Secretary concern about the tone, the timbre and the technical nature of the spring statement. It was an emergency budget in all but name, and it proves the point that Labour, just as we have seen with past Labour governments, cannot be trusted to run the economy or to keep to its word. And I share with Liz Smith some of the concerns about the nature of the welfare cuts, but more importantly also the timing of those welfare cuts, because it is clear that this Labour government has been forced into taking these decisions because of the black hole in the budget that Labour has created since it came to office last year. These measures reek of desperation. They were not planned. However, we do now welcome one thing, which is a debate around the future of welfare, not just in the rest of the UK, but also here in Scotland. But let's not beat around the bush. This is just yet another broken promise from a broken promise Labour government. They said they would not raise national insurance, and they did, and that is something that will hamper getting people back into jobs and make it more difficult to achieve their objective of getting people off benefits and back into work. And appallingly, one of Labour's first acts into coming to office was to take winter fuel payments away from pensioners, something that I would like to remind the Minister that the SNP has only still partially restored, despite what they are still claiming. Now, the Labour Party have created a budget black hole of immense proportions, but that does not let the SNP off the hook either. And I will come to the black hole that the SNP are creating. I will take an intervention from
Cabinet Secretary. As he wishes to discuss, as he puts it, the black hole, would he then, as part of that analysis, talk about the additional money that I think he wants me to spend on pensioner fuel payments that he just complained about? So we are reintroducing universal. If he wants me to go more, perhaps he can extrapolate how much he'd like to add to the black hole he has identified in expenditure.
Has said in its defence time and time again, this is about priorities and choices. The problem with this government, it has the wrong priorities and has made the wrong choices. Now, ultimately, the best means by which we reduce the benefits bill across the whole of the UK, but particularly here in Scotland, is to deliver growth. And this is something that this SNP government has failed to do. But it is something now that the Labour Party is undermining as well, because only yesterday we found out that the IMF have downgraded UK growth forecasts for this year and next. Inflation is set to rise and GDP per capita will barely grow this year. And borrowing and the cost of borrowing is soaring under Labour. Now, Labour will say that this is the consequence of tariffs, when we all know that it was Rachel Reeves who topped down the UK economy prior to that first budget and who fundamentally undermined the UK economy by the budget and then by the spring statement. And those effects, the effects of Labour in government, will be felt here in Scotland, because according to the IMF, struggling families, that is those in work and those on benefits, will be paying the price of a Labour government in the form of higher prices in the shops and lower wage growth this year and into the future. And as the IMF warns, this is simply an issue that is being faced primarily by the UK and the US, who are the principal outliers in respect of this. Now, compare that to the previous outgoing Conservative government, where inflation was falling, interest rates were on a downward trajectory, and Scotland was receiving a record block grant from Westminster. And now we are seeing the Labour government, and Mr Mara can laugh about the benign position that he was left that has been ruined by Rachel Reeves. But now Michael Mara's government is taking decisions that will cut £900 million to the Scottish budget into the future. But the SNP cannot simply wring their hands and blame others in respect of the predicament they find themselves, because this SNP government's addiction to increasing welfare spend means that public services will now suffer more than they were going to suffer already. And that means that whether it's pensioners, business owners, workers or farmers, we know that Keir Starmer is treating them as fools, but the SNP government is not levelling with them either. They cannot simply blame others for this, because by 2030 the SNP benefits deficit is going to be £2 billion. And Willie Rennie, who's not in the Chamber at the moment, was right to point out some of the structural challenges that this government is failing to address because of his approach to benefits. Those are in relation to labour market trends, in relation to Scotland's demographics, but also in relation to this issue of economic inactivity, which I still do not think the SNP government is taking seriously enough. Deputy Presiding Officer, we all want to live in a society that looks after vulnerable people, and that can be achieved alongside and with welfare reform. In conclusion, I say this to ministers: realism must prevail in all the budgetary decisions that this Parliament takes. You simply cannot hope that the money will turn up or that the taxpayer will ultimately foot the bill. The Scottish Government need to get a grip of long-term trends in welfare. The Labour Government has made that more urgent, but the Government cannot in any way say that they are on a sustainable path. They need to act, and they need to act now.
Thank you, Mr Hoy. I now call Marie McNair to be followed by Martin Whitfield. Ms McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to have the chance to speak in this important debate. Cruelty is becoming a hallmark of this UK Government. It is simply indefensible. They are choosing to penalise some of the poorest people in our society. These are reforms that could well have been delivered with a blue rosette. These are not my words, nor quotes from the Scottish Government. Presiding Officer, these are from the National Education Union, the STUC and the disability charity Scope. And they're not alone in this thinking. I'm thankful to all organisations for providing briefings for this debate: Cite Scotland, Sam H, Citizen Advice Scotland and Carer Scotland, to name just a few. All detailed their extreme concerns and urged for these reforms to be reconsidered. A recent Freedom of Information request has revealed that almost 90% of those currently receiving standard daily living component of PIP will be impacted by the UK Government cuts. This is appalling. And on the 6th of March, I held a debate to discuss the reported intention of the Labour Government to go ahead with these punitive welfare reforms. And at the time, so-called Scottish Labour MSPs in the Chamber said the debate was premature and pointless. But now we see it was on the knuckle. And now we have disabled people demonstrating outside the office of Anna Sarwar, Pam Duncan-Glancy, Polly McNeill and Paul Sweeney. But for a change, there's just silence from them. Instead of a change of direction, we have a Labour Government in Westminster that is intent on making disabled people, children and pensioners pay for austerity. And the biggest lie of any election campaign is the one from Anna Sarwar in June 2024, when he said, "Read my lips, no austerity under Labour." What we're seeing now is just austerity 2.0, and it is crystal clear that the Scottish Labour leader's words count for absolutely nothing. Presiding Officer, the UK Government's own impact analysis shows that 250,000 people, including 50,000 children, will be pushed into poverty under these plans. And these cuts are inhumane and cruel. And this has been recognised by the leading disability charity Scope, who have described them as catastrophic. And it's not just them who feel this way. Citizen Advice Scotland have stated these reforms will result in a reduction of £5 billion in social security expenditure by 2030. This will have enormous consequences and push more disabled people into poverty. And across the board, Scotland's charities recognise that this decision puts funding for Scotland's social security system at risk. Less funding for the UK PIP will reduce the amount available to the Scottish Government to spend on social security, irrespective of demand for adult disability payment and differing demographics in Scotland. And now we know that the Scottish Government has had the confirmation from the Treasury that there will be cuts to Scotland's block grant as a result of the welfare cuts from 2026-27. and initial indications are that the changes will reduce the block grant funding from Scotland to receive for social security benefits in 2029-30 by £408 million. So the Labour MSPs here today should stand up and call out their UK bosses. First it was the Labour keeping the two-child cap, then removing the winter fuel payment, abandoning WASPI, and now targeting disabled people. Children, the elderly, the disabled, low-income families have been left out in the cold by the Labour Party. While Labour imposes more damaging austerity and threatens the vulnerable, the SNP will stand up for those who need support, with a record £6.9 billion to be invested in devolved benefits in 2025-26, assisting disabled people, helping low-income families with living costs, and reinstating winter heating support to pensioners. By going even further than the Tories with devastating cuts to disabled people, Labour have embarked on a total betrayal of the promises they made to voters. The Labour Party simply cannot be trusted. While Anna Sarwar remains silent on this matter, I and my colleagues in the SNP will stand up for the most vulnerable in our society, and the SNP will continue to prioritise dignity, fairness and respect. In comparison to the Labour Party, they push on with their values of humiliation, injustice and disrespect. Presiding Officer, this is a matter of urgency, and this decision must be reversed now, as it is quite clear that Scotland continues to be an afterthought for successive Labour governments. Therefore, it is more urgent than ever that Scotland becomes an independent country so that we have the full powers needed to tackle poverty and create a fairer and more equal society for Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McNair. And I now call Martin Whitfield. Mr Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer, and it's a pleasure to contribute to this interesting debate this afternoon. But before I get into the motion and the amendments, I think it's important that we frame this debate correctly, because we are sitting here in this devolved Parliament on a reserved matter, and we're talking about a consultation paper that is exactly that, a consultation paper, a paper in which the public and other groups can contribute to seek the answers to support the development of the UK Government's policy going forward. And it is, as a number of contributors have said, a missed opportunity to discuss a really profound point, which is the reform of social security and how that sits within a jigsaw that the Scottish Government and that this Parliament have whole responsibility for, that for health, that for education, that for transport, to mention just 3 areas that have been discussed, because people's lives here in Scotland are complex, they are complicated. The interactions between waiting on a health waiting list or being unable to get a GP's appointment, the challenge a young person feels who's becoming disengaged from school and sees no future in the usual map into adulthood that others take, is a missed opportunity. As is the ability to discuss the transport questions, and it is a great pleasure that so many local MSPs have been and contributed in this debate, given the challenges that we have of a very specific bus service in East Lothian, which is the 26, and the fact that a town or a village that has a growing population has lost access to transport to get to work. And all of this sits within a framework of the challenges that people face. The pathways to work, reforming benefits and support to get Britain working green paper is exactly that. It presents an opportunity to reshape the social security system in a way that supports and encourages people into good work, while reducing the bureaucracy faced by those already in receipt of social security. And it's important to recognise that many of the areas covered, as others have done in the Green Paper, are devolved to the Scottish Parliament and as such will not be affected by the proposed changes. However, the proposals within the Green Paper aim to create a more supportive environment for all, regardless of those devolved powers. And I welcome the £1 billion commitment for employability services across the UK. This is a significant investment and will provide necessary resource to help individuals find and sustain good work. Programmes like the Work and Health Programme have already shown success in supporting people with disability and health conditions into employment. Well-paid, secure employment is the most sustainable route out of poverty. And I commend the UK Labour administration for their efforts to increase, for example, the national living wage. The increase that a full-time worker earning the national living wage will see their annual income rise by over £1,000, providing much-needed financial relief. And additionally, the Employment Rights Bill aims to improve workers' rights by ensuring fair treatment and protection against unfair dismissal. Again, something that will benefit millions of workers across the country. And the Green Paper specifically seeks views and opinions on how employers can be assisted, firstly, to follow their already legal requirement to make reasonable changes and facilitation so that disabled people will work, but how can that go forward? And this is an important question that need to be asked, to need to shape a question going forward, that a number of contributors have pointed out that there is a challenge. There is a massive challenge coming down the line with regard to those in economic inactivity. And I want to take, as my point with regard to economic inactivity, a look at the 84,000 young people in Scotland who are not in work, education or training. And this must be a significant concern. Indeed, the figure now for 16 to 24-year-olds at 37.6% is greater than it was in 2008-09, the time of the economic crash, when it was only 30.1%. Both figures are unacceptable, but the current economic inactivity is more than just a seedling. It is a growing tree to a future catastrophe that is facing Scotland. I do welcome initiatives such as the Youth Employment Strategy, developing the young workforce with its aim to reduce the youth unemployment by 40% by providing tailored support, which it achieved early. The support through the activity agreement, the apprenticeship, vocational training, the modern apprenticeships and graduate apprenticeships. But while these have had notable successes, there are several areas where it can be criticised and should be, and I look to the Scottish Government to work on this. The employer engagement. A significant number of employers are unable to engage within it. The inclusivity of it, that rate has decreased. The quality of the vocational education has gone down. The long-term impact is not being monitored and has not been supported. And in particular, the regional disparities that have occurred across Scotland with regard to this. I am conscious of time, Deputy Presiding Officer, but I feel the SNP Scottish Government must address these criticisms so that they can further enhance and make sure that the impact is positive. We must not only equip young people with the skills they need to succeed, but we also need to help build a more inclusive and skilled workforce. In conclusion, as we move forward with these reforms, let us ensure our policies respect the value of work, that are fair, that protect the most vulnerable, those who are unable to ever work, and let us work together to create a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and where nobody is left behind. I'm grateful.
Thank you, Mr Whitfield. We will now move to closing speeches, and I call on Maggie Chapman to close on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary opened this afternoon's debate with a message of solidarity with disabled people, recognising their worth as human beings, as members of our society, as people with intrinsic value, regardless of their ability to contribute to the economic machinery of our world. That is something with which I wholeheartedly concur. We have the opportunity this afternoon to speak clearly as a Parliament against proposed reforms that will result in some people, our constituents, being pushed into, or indeed further into, poverty, or worse. Because, as we've been told by so many organisations concerned about this issue, these reforms, if implemented as suggested in the Green Paper, will kill people. I want to thank all the organisations that have been in touch in recent weeks about the proposed reforms. We've had briefings and research summaries, modelling of different outcomes. We've had personal stories relayed to us, real-life experiences of people who are scared of the consequences of these proposed cuts. From the Poverty Alliance and Joseph Rowntree Foundation to Glasgow Disability Alliance, Carers Scotland, and of course trade unions and community groups. Thank you all. I especially want to thank the local activists in Aberdeen and Dundee and elsewhere in the North East who are already working hard to pull together to provide mutual aid and support for those who are already struggling. Those networks of mutual aid will be so much more vital if these reforms are implemented. As Claire Adamson stated quite clearly, these reforms were not what Labour promised when they were campaigning for power last year. Indeed, Labour campaigned against continuing austerity. There will be no austerity under Labour. We remember those words well. Of course, they also, at the same time, pledged not to increase taxes. It was obvious to many that they would have to break one of those pledges. And I find it staggering that, in the face of the resources needed to support people, Labour has chosen to keep the promise that most benefits those who already have more than enough to live on. Seeing Anna Sawa say this week that wealth taxes are the wrong solution is just gobsmacking. How is it that a Labour Party would rather punish disabled people and carers, the people who have already borne the brunt of the financial crisis of 15 years of austerity and the pandemic, than back redistributive taxation? Why do we not have a green paper on taxation reform from the UK government, rather than this attack on social security? Because depriving people of benefits is not, despite what so many people say, what Labour say over and over again, depriving people of benefits will not improve people's lives. They can't just go and get a job. This is the mentality of the workhouse. And of course, attacking carers, as we've heard this afternoon, is counterproductive from every perspective, moral, practical and financial. Who will pick up the pieces? Who will bear the costs? It will be the NHS. It will be our already broken homelessness support system. It will feed the care crisis we have. It will be food banks that already can't feed all those who have come to rely on them. Proposing cuts to carers' allowance also, I think, betrays what the UK government really thinks about the value of caring. Caring is work. Unpaid carers provide a vital service to our society. They save our public and third sector organisations billions of pounds a year. Caring is perhaps one of the most important jobs that we could have as human beings, unpaid or paid. We should not be going after the pretty poor allowance that unpaid carers get at the moment. Paul O'Kane said that scrapping the whole of the Green Paper is not a sensible option. He also said that we needed a proper conversation about social security reform. I don't disagree with that second statement. So let us talk about a minimum income guarantee as a step to a universal basic income that values everyone just for being human, rather than for what economic contribution they can make. Let us talk about increasing the Scottish Child Payment and providing universal free school meals. Let us talk about debt relief for those with council tax arrears. Let us genuinely talk about prevention of poverty. Let us also, then, talk about the economic transformation that we need to support that, definitely and defiantly around taxation. It cannot be justifiable that, during the COVID pandemic, billionaires saw their wealth grow by 27% when so many disabled people and others were left destitute. This is the Green Paper I wish we had to discuss. Genuine wealth redistribution to improve the lives of the majority, rather than targeting those who can least afford to deal with the consequences. Presiding Officer, as we know, politics is about choices. Let us choose justice for disabled people, for their carers, for those with mental ill health, for those unable to participate in the current economic system. Let us choose to fight for dignity for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I now call on Michael Mara to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 6 minutes, around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I can thank all members for their contributions to the debate today. And I want to begin by acknowledging what I think is very significant anxiety of many citizens around the reform of social security. Some of the proposals set out in the Green Paper consultation are challenging and are rightly the source of much debate, analysis and consideration, as Paul O'Kane set out in his contribution opening the debate today. And frankly, none of this is easy. But what we are clear about is that change is necessary and is required. Certainly.
Pam Duncan-Clancy.
I thank the member for taking an intervention on that point, and I thank the member for recognising, as others have, about the challenging aspects of the paper and the impact that they will have on disabled people. And so can I ask the member if he agrees with me that all changes to support for disabled people must have dignity and respect at their heart, and that involving disabled people in these decisions is absolutely essential?
Michael Mara.
I couldn't agree with that sentiment more, I have to say, in terms of the consultation on this Green Papers that's carried out has to hold those principles absolutely at their heart. And I recognise the huge amount of work that my colleague Pam Duncan-Glancy does as an advocate for disabled people in Scotland over many years, but also in this chamber. But I think as a party we are very clear that change is necessary, and far too often people are being trapped in inactivity rather than being supported into work. And that's work that people want, Presiding Officer. It's a purpose that people crave, and it's the better life that work can mean for people in our communities. Outcomes for people in Scotland and our communities and the country as a whole are not good enough, and they are going in the wrong direction. The number of young people that are economically inactive in this country has surged in recent years. It is a massive problem, and some days I wonder whether, frankly, it's a bigger problem than tariffs from Trump. That actually the squandering of the human potential in our country, and that's what it is the real long-term cost to the potential of a better economy in our country. We also know that economic activity amongst young people is higher in Scotland than it is across the rest of the UK. We also know we're not supporting enough people in general into work. Economic inactivity in Scotland has been higher than the UK for every quarter of the last 5 years, every quarter. And the motion in front of the Parliament today calls, as colleagues have pointed out, for the entirety of this reform programme to be scrapped. So the SNP, I think, on this basis, does not support the increases in the Universal Credit Standard Allowance. They don't believe that we should scrap the work capability assessment. They don't want to introduce a right to try work with no risk to welfare support. And they are opposed to £1 billion in employability support that's set out in that Green Paper. And of course that comes as very little surprise given the cuts that have been made by this government to employability programmes in Scotland. So I think there is, though, some really key themes that have come out through the debate today. And Liz Smith started talking about the interaction of the systems, I thought, very well put, and some of the challenges that arise from that. I think that's been acknowledged by speakers across the chamber. But I think we can broaden that point, frankly, in terms of the interaction, and many speakers have, about our public services generally, our NHS, the fact that 1 in 6 people in Scotland are stuck on waiting lists. We know that we've got 300,000 people of a working age in Scotland unable to go into work because of illness. And that is a function, the interaction of frankly, our illness service in Scotland and how that interacts with the social security system both in Scotland and across the UK. And there are tensions in terms of those short-term solutions, in terms of fixing our NHS and the long-term trends. Willie Rennie talked to some of those issues. The costs of poverty in the longer run, and what we see is actions that might be taken in the shorter run, whether that be to reduce costs. I think that was well set out. There are tensions there about where the burden falls on other parts of our public services. But we have to make sure that we see that picture in the round. The sustainability of our public finances are what the sustainability of our public services depend upon. We have to be sure that we can invest in social security. But the social security bill in this country, across the whole of the UK, will continue to rise. It will continue to rise for years and years to come. That is absolutely clear, and that investment will be made. Maggie Chapman talked about the position of the UK government. I would draw attention to the OBR's analysis of the autumn budget, which set out that this was the most redistributive budget in recent history, that the people who benefited most from it were in the bottom decile of income in the whole of the UK. And frankly, that the people who were paying the most were at the top end of that scale. That is redistribution. Happy to take the intervention.
Can I ask him then, does he agree or not with Anna Sawa, who said earlier this week that wealth tax isn't an option? If he's talking about redistribution, we have to look at taxation, and we have to look at taxation on wealth, not only income but asset wealth as well.
Michael Mara. I take the point in terms of we know that across Scotland that we're going to have to raise the amount of public income over the next couple of decades if we're going to meet the requirements for funding our public services and the increasing demand of demographic challenges and climate change on our sustainability of our public services. In the short run, a wealth tax is not possible to do. I have to say the Finance Committee has taken a decade to put in place a tax on sand, which is exactly the same tax as the one that's run across the whole of the UK. The idea that we can solve these problems with a wealth tax in this Parliament in the next few years, frankly, is for the birds. I would say that the Cabinet Secretary seems to take it one step further, though, and actually fully reject the idea of any fiscal rules that we should have. Again, little surprise, given that this is a government that made £70 billion of spending demands ahead of the autumn budget and rejected £45 billion of revenue raisers. So £115 billion of a fiscal adjustment, more than double the Liz Truss's impact on the UK economy that laid low the financial system in the UK. Which brings me to Craig Hoy's rather fantastical fancy account of recent economic history in this country. If he doesn't recognise the economic carnage that was wrought by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng and the absolutely horrendous inheritance that the UK government received from that Tory government, then frankly I don't think he's reading enough of the right papers, and frankly he's got his eyes closed and his ears shut. We do have to make sure that we can build a better economy that serves far more of the people who require it in this country. That has to be based on work. We have to make sure that we take some of the difficult decisions to make that happen. We have to do it, as my colleague Pam Duncan-Glancy set out, as my colleagues Claire Baker, Paul O'Kane and Martin Whitfield have as well. We have to do that on the basis of, yes, making tough decisions, making sure we do them and hold people's dignity at our core.
Thank you, and I call on Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I remind members around receipt of ADP? There's always been a problem in politics, but there are very few easy questions and even fewer answers. And as Willie Rennie pointed out, social security has never been a simple topic. From its inception, governments have had to deal with questions of who gets how much of what, balancing generosity with how do we pay for it. But I think I can say confidently that we face a landscape that is more challenging today than ever before. More people than ever qualify for benefits, creating an ever-growing bill that is becoming less sustainable by the day. This is due to a number of factors, many of which are out of the control of either the UK or the Scottish Government. For instance, an ageing population creates more demand for retirement age and disability payments. However, there are a number of decisions that have been taken that inflate the cost of benefits. The value of the awards has been increased over the years, and the criteria for various payments have been expanded, meaning that more people are eligible for support today than in previous generations. Presiding Officer, these decisions taken by government have consequences. Neither of them are necessarily bad decisions, but they do require sacrifices in other areas to make the cost sustainable. Happy to give way.
Cabinet Secretary.
Given he has been on the social security when I've introduced much of these SSIs, can he confirm that he has actually supported all of them and indeed brought forward an amendment on uprating himself?
Jeremy Balfour.
I am absolutely happy to confirm that, and we'll come to that in a moment. But this is not easy. In prioritising certain benefits, you necessarily need to take away from others. And that's the reality of government. Hard decisions must be made and defended. This is the predicament that the UK government find themselves in now. They are taking decisions to balance the budget. Unfortunately, a number of decisions that they have taken are coming at the expense of some of the most vulnerable in our society, such as the cuts to PIP. As was pointed out in the briefing from Glasgow Disability Alliance, under the additional qualifying criteria for PIP suggested in the Green Paper, they will be introduced. Disabled people will be unable to fully dress themselves, unable to get in or out of a shower without assistance, unable to feed themselves without assistance, or unable to go to the toilet without supervision, may no longer qualify for PIP. This has to be, in 21st century UK, inaccessible. Closer to home, we have a Scottish Government who simply seem to be unwilling to deal with the fact that there are difficult decisions to be made. It has been forecast, as others have pointed out, that there will be a £1.3 billion deficit in the Scottish Social Security budget by the year 2027. and we yet to hear anything from the SNP on how they propose to address this. Presiding Officer, social security and welfare are teetering to the edge. We have to have a grown-up discussion on how we are going to address this looming crisis. It will have to lay aside partisan self-interest, dogmatic adherence to ideologies, and look at pragmatic solutions. If it will mean giving up the benefits arms race, where each party promises more and more unsustainable increase to the budget, hoping that it can push the consequences far enough down the road that someone else will have to deal with it. Presiding Officer, instead, we should be promoting economic growth, as others have pointed out, which will have a dual effect of raising more revenue to sustain lifeline payments while also decreasing the number of people relying on out-of-work benefits as the rising tide of growth lifts all boats. A number of speakers like Smith, Craig Hoy, some from the Labour benches have pointed within the Green Paper to the change of going into be able to go in and out of unemployment, and I think that is welcome, and we do need to take that forward. As a brief aside to that point, Presiding Officer, a talking point that seems to be becoming more concern within Scottish political landscape is this plan to cut disability benefits like ADP and PIP to get disabled people into employment instead. Let's be clear, these benefits are not means tested. They are never intended to be income replacement benefits. They are paid to help disabled people to be in a position to take part in society, and in many cases without PIP or ADP, they would never be able to go to work or leave their house. Able-bodied people do not require help to get up in the morning and get ready. I and others do, and many disabled people would not work without that help. As I've said, they are not an income replacement, they are a field levier, and I hope that we can dispense with this idea that ADP and PIP are in any way linked to income and employment. To conclude, Presiding Officer, if we are to avoid a true crisis in social security, we need to start having grown-up conversations about how we make it both generous and sustainable. I agree with the Cabinet Secretary when she says it is a social investment, but we need to make sure that it's an investment that we can afford. And on a number of occasions, both members and the Cabinet Secretary have failed to come forward to say where the money will come from to pay for this looking deficit. I'm committed, my party is committed, to be part of the solution. I'm open to be involved in cross-party talks to come up with a solution. I hope we can have a much more constructive debate, perhaps post-next year, on where social security goes in the decades ahead. But we cannot remain where we are. We need to be bold in our thinking, protect the vulnerable, but also protect the budget that we all need to look after. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. I call on the Cabinet Secretary to wind up to just before 5 p.m, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I thank all members who have contributed to today's debate. Can I begin by mentioning the, as always, very thoughtful contribution that Liz Smith made right at the start of this, and particularly the areas where she talked about the complexity of now having devolved and reserved benefits, the interaction between them. This is now, we have now seen a number of examples in recent years where this is having real and direct impacts on the ability of the Scottish Government to be able to administer the devolved benefit system. When we see the changes that were made, the handbrake turns that were made by the UK Government on pension age winter heating payments, and now we see changes to PIP or to work capability assessments that will have very, very significant impacts, both on the budget but also on how benefits are administered. And I would agree with her that we really do need to find a better way of doing this. And the responsibility is with both governments. Absolutely, absolutely, that is key. So, for example, when we look to implement any changes that may come from the ADP review that's currently being undertaken, we would have to be very clear with the UK Government what they were, and they would have to be very clear about what the implications were. So I recognise that very keenly indeed. We also need the UK Government to do the same, Presiding Officer, and we're not at that stage. I had a very useful and very polite, as always, meeting with Stephen Timms this morning to discuss some of these issues. As always, there was much disagreement on policy, but we need to find a better way, even when there's policy agreements, of the practicalities, and we are not there yet. So, for example, I do not know whether ADP, even if we don't make any changes, will be able to rely on if the work capability assessment is scrapped. Now, that's not good for the government or how we administer benefits, but also, as many members have pointed out, it is very problematic and concerning for the individuals that will be involved in that. So she raises an exceptionally fair point that both governments need to rise to the challenge on. Many members have talked about economic inactivity as part of this process, and again, quite right to do so, because helping people into fair, sustainable jobs and addressing economic inactivity is exceptionally important. Indeed, it's central to the Government's vision of a fairer, welfare Scotland. And the devolved employability services do have a pivotal role to play by providing support, and the No One Left Behind approach is about supporting people into the right job or the route that's best for their circumstances. Statistics have shown that about 20% of No One Left Behind participants were economically inactive at their start date, and there is support there. I will in one moment, if Mr Rennie will forgive me. And there's also the work that the Deputy First Minister is undertaking to build on that. For example, the recent meeting she's had with business and the third sector leaders to talk about what additional measures do need to be taken on reducing economic inactivity, and she will say more on that, and the Government will say more on that in due course. And I'll give way to Mr Rennie.
Willie Rennie.
Does the Cabinet Secretary recognise the importance of autism services and the current concern right across the country, including the abandonment of shared care arrangements with private consultancies, that is having a direct impact on their ability to get work? And what discussions has she had with her colleague who's sitting next to her about making that change?
Cabinet Secretary.
There are, of course, clinical decisions that quite rightly shouldn't be in the hands of politicians. But I was going to come to Mr Rennie's contribution later, Presiding Officer, but I'll do so now, because he raised very important points on health and the importance of recognising the link between the health service and economic inactivity. And one of the examples he gave was around autism. There are, of course, others. And he's quite right to do so. That's exactly why we have the operational improvement plan in place, why we're investing to bring down waiting times. And that link between health services and economic activity is recognised by the Government and recognised by my colleague Neil Gray. Many members, of course, have also talked about fiscal sustainability of social security, and again, an absolutely integral point to any discussions we will need to be having. I would gently point out to some contradictory principles that we have flowing through this. Many of the proposed cuts that are being taken forward, we are told, and I presume it was supposed to be a reassurance, that many of the proposed cuts, or those that are already starting to be taken forward by the UK Government, don't impact on Scotland. So we could take different decisions on ADP. Well, indeed we can. And then at the same time, either in the same speech or members from the same party will say we need to look at the financial sustainability of our social security system, and we need to drive down the social security expenditure in Scotland. I would gently point out that there is a contradiction in there about washing our hands about our concerns about what's happening at a UK level, but also at the same time insisting that we need to drive down social security. And I'll give way to Mr Hoy.
Craig Hoy.
I thank the Minister for giving way. Will she concede one point, however, that the alarm bells were ringing about the sustainability of Scotland's social security budget before the spring statement, and we were putting those questions to the government at that point? And can she answer the question, how does the government intend to plug that £1.9 billion gap she's going to face by the end of this decade? Because she cannot simply say that the money is going to turn up from somewhere. She must be starting to plan for that now. Is it tax rises or is it public service cuts?
Cabinet Secretary.
One of the ways, Mr Hoy, is that we come together to ensure that we send a strong voice to the UK Government that they should not be making the cuts that they're about to make, and therefore the impacts on our budget. That would be the first thing that we could do to prevent some of that. But he is, in the spirit of attempted consensus, he is right to say that we do need to manage variances between the expenditure that we have and the block grant adjustments that will come from Westminster. But as we have done every single year, Presiding Officer, we will do so by producing that balanced budget as part of the annual budget process. Members are quite right to say that this is about decisions and it's about choices. But I will put some context on this, that the proportion of the budget which the Scottish Government has chosen to invest to enhance the social security offer and over and above the money we get from the UK Government is projected to be less than 3.5% of the total Scottish Government resource budget in 29-30. So yes, there is a challenge, but that is the level of the challenge. And I go back to the point that if people are wishing to see cuts to the social security budget, do they wish us to take it from the 870,000 disabled people that currently receive benefits, or the 806,000 people in low-income families, or indeed the 110,000 carers? When we're talking about financial sustainability, fiscal sustainability of social security, the cuts that people are talking about are cuts to those people, Presiding Officer. Now, many people, including Paul Kane, talked about employment, and again, quite right to do so. Employment is a way out of poverty, as Mr O'Kane says, but it is not for many, many people. And the concerns about what's happening within the UK Government is they want to see more people supported into work. Well, I do too. But the young people and disabled people are exactly the people that they will be cutting support from. And it goes back to the point that Jeremy Balfour very eloquently made in his closing remarks there. I also genuinely do not understand how cutting a young person's universal credit or cutting a young person's PIP will encourage them or indeed support them into work. In fact, it will do the exact opposite, Presiding Officer. And that is the genuine frustration I have listening, particularly to Labour colleagues who say this is all about employability and encouraging people into employability, at the same time as cutting support that will take people away from work and present another barrier to work. Willie Rennie also mentioned in his contributions, and I thought he put it very, very fairly, that the primary focus of the paper, the Green Paper, is about welfare cuts, not pathways into work. And he's absolutely right on that. Talking about the financial stress that the country is feeling being displaced onto individuals or onto the health service. And again, he is absolutely right. That's something which will not just impact on the reserve benefits, but will impact on devolved benefits, but also on our health service and on social care. Maggie Chapman quite rightly pointed to the impact on carers. And we haven't spoken about the carers particularly much this afternoon, but of course the impact on disabled benefits will impact on carers. And if you're in a disabled household, that is a double whammy on that household. If the disabled person has their benefits cut and the carer has their benefit cut as well. And she's quite right to point to the disproportionate effect on women and the gendered analysis that must be undertaken as we look at social security. There were a number of points that were made, Presiding Officer, that I think is very important from Ros McCall, for example, talking about the whole family support and looking at whole family or a whole person's need rather than just looking at social security. But that's exactly why whole family support is such an important part of our previous programme for government and the First Minister's drive to tackle child poverty. Claire Baker talked about the Child Poverty Task Force at the UK Government. Again, I go back to the point that you can launch a pilot on breakfast clubs, and indeed the Scottish Government in its previous budget already announced expanded breakfast clubs in Scotland, but you can't raise that as a look how great we're doing at exactly the same time as reports in the media yesterday have suggested that the task force won't look to scrap the two-child cap. The biggest change you could make to lift children out of poverty, and it certainly looks like the UK Government is walking away from that. We'll get on in the meantime on mitigating that two-child cap. I just wish the task force and the UK Government would do so. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, these decisions that are being made by the UK Government are another example of a government whose priorities seem to be all about balancing the books on those who are the most vulnerable in our society. And it is vital that the UK Government takes note of the real worry, concern, fear that is being caused by their consultation and indeed some of the plans that they are already beginning to implement. I wish they would listen to the people that they are supposedly here to serve, and I hope that we can come together to send a very strong message on behalf of disabled people and their carers that this Parliament thinks the changes that they plan to make at the UK Government level are unacceptable, and we unite tonight to take a strong voice to the UK Parliament against those cuts. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on UK Government welfare reforms. It's now time to move to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 17268 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme. And I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 17268 be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of 3 Parliamentary Bureau motions, and I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move motions 17269 and 17270 on committee meeting times and 17271 on designation of a lead committee.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And the question on these motions will be put at decision time, and there are 4 questions to be put as a result of today's business. Can I remind members that if the amendment in the name of Liz Smith is agreed to, the amendment in the name of Paul O'Kane will fall? And the first question is that Amendment 17242.3 in the name of Liz Smith, which seeks to amend Motion 17242 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on UK Government welfare reforms, be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system. The question is that Amendment 17242.3 in the name of Liz Smith, which seeks to amend Motion 17242 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on UK Government welfare reforms, be agreed, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 17242.3 in the name of Liz Smith is yes 27, no 82. There were 5 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. And the next question is that amendment 17242.1 in the name of Paul O'Kane, which seeks to amend motion 17242 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on UK Government welfare reforms, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore it will move to a vote and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 17242.1 in the name of Paul O'Kane is yes 14, no 100. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. And the next question is that motion 17242 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on UK Government welfare reforms be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore will move to a vote and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on motion 17242 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville is yes 73, no 40. There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed. and I propose to ask a single question on 3 Parliamentary Bureau motions. Does any member object? No member objects. Therefore, the final question is that motions 17269 and 17270 on committee meeting times and 17271 on designation of a lead committee in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motions are therefore agreed, and that concludes decision time, and we'll now move on to members' business in the name of Jackie Dunbar.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.